Appendix 4, Part 1 of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Barty Begley. Appendix 4, Part 1 of Personal Narrative of a Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah by Richard Francis Burton. Appendix 4. The Navigation and Voyages of Ludovicus Vertomannus, Gentleman of Rome, A.D. 1503. The first of the pilgrims to Mecca and Al-Madinah who has left an authentic account of the holy cities is Louis Vertomannus, Ludovico Bartema, Gentleman of the City of Rome. Footnote: I have consulted the Navigation and Voyages of Louis Vertomannus to the regions of Arabia, Egypt, Persia, Syria, Ethiopia and East India, both within and without the river of Ganges, etc., containing many notable and strange things, both historical and natural, translated out of Latin into English by Richard Eden, in the year of our Lord 1576. Hakluyt's Voyages, Volume 4. The curious reader will also find the work in Purchas, Pilgrims and Pilgrimage, Volume 2, and Ramusio, Raccolta della Navigazione e Viaggi, Toma 1. The Travels of Bartema were first published at Milan, AD 1511, and the first English translation appeared in Yldz and Eden's Decades, 4 tomes, AD 1555. End of footnote. If any man, says this author, shall demand of me the cause of this my voyage, certainly I can show no better reason than is the ardent desire of knowledge, which hath moved many other to see the world and the miracles of God therein. In the year of our Lord 1503, he departed from Venice with prosperous winds, arrived at Alexandria and visited Babylon of Egypt, Berinto, Tripoli, Antioch and Damascus. He started from the latter place on the 8th of April 1503 in familiarity and friendship with a certain Captain Mameluke, which term he applies to all such Christians as have forsaken their faith to serve the Mahometans and Turks, and in the garb of a Mameluki renegado. He estimates the Damascus caravan to consist of 40,000 men and 35,000 camels, nearly 6 times its present number. Footnote: the number of pilgrims in this caravan is still grossly exaggerated. I cannot believe that it contains more than 7,000 of both sexes and all ages. End of footnote. On the way they were enforced to conflict with a great multitude of the Arabians, but the 60 Mamluks composing their escort were more than a match for 50,000 Bedouin. On one occasion the caravan, attacked by 24,000 Arabians, slew 1,500 of the enemies, losing in the conflict only a man and a woman. Footnote: this may confirm Strabo's account of Aelius Gallus' loss after a conflict with a host of Arabs, 2 Roman soldiers. Monsignor Jomard, noticing the case, pleasantly remarks that the 2 individuals in question are to be pitied for their extreme ill luck. End of footnote. This marvel, which is probably not without some exaggeration, he explains by the strength and valiance of the Mamelukes, by the practice still popular of using the camels in the stead of a bulwark and placing the merchants in the midst of the army, that is, in the midst of the camels, while the pilgrims fought manfully on every side, and, finally, by the circumstance that the Arabs were unarmed and wear only a thin loose vesture, and are beside almost naked, their horses also being ill furnished and without saddles or other furniture. The Hijazi Badui of this day are a much more dangerous enemy. The matchlock and musket have made him so, and the only means of crippling him is to prevent the importation of firearms and lead, and by slow degrees to disarm the population. After performing the ceremonies of pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah, he escaped to Zida or Jeddah, despite the trumpeter of the caravana giving warning to all the Mamluks to make ready their horses to direct their journey towards Syria with proclamation of death to all that should refuse to do so, and embarked for Persia upon the Red Sea. He touched at certain ports of Al-Yaman, and got into trouble at Aden, where the Mahometans took him and put shackles on his legs, which came by occasion of a certain idolater who cried after him, saying, "O Christian dog, born of dogs." Footnote: this venerable form of abuse still survives the lapse of time. One of the first salutations reaching the ears of the overlands at Alexandria is some little boy's "Ya Nazrani Kalbawani," etc., etc. "O Nazarene, O dog obscene," etc., etc. In Percy's Reliques we read of the knight calling his Muslim opponent "unchristian hound," a retort courteous to the Christen hound previously applied to him by the pagan. End of footnote. The lieutenant of the Sultan assembled his council, consulted them about putting the traveller to death as a spy of Portugales, and threw him ironed into a dungeon. On being carried shackled into the presence of the Sultan, Barthema said that he was a Roman, professed a Mameluke in Babylon of Al-Khair. But when told to utter the formula of the Muslim faith, he held his tongue, either that it pleased not God, or that for fear and scruple of conscience he durst not. For which offence he was again deprived of ye fruition of heaven. But, happily for Barthema, in those days the women of Arabia were greatly in love with white men. Before escaping from Mecca, he lay hid in the house of a Mohammedan, and could not express his gratitude for the good wife's care. Also, he says, this furthered my good entertainment, that there was in the house a fair young maid, the niece of the Mohammedan, who was greatly in love with me. At Aden he was equally fortunate. One of the Sultan's 3 wives, on the departure of her lord and master, bestowed her heart upon the traveller. She was very fair and comely after their manner, and of colour inclining to black. She would spend the whole day in beholding Barthema, who wandered about simulating madness. Footnote. For a full account of the mania fit, I must refer the curious reader to the original, Book 2, Chapter 5. The only mistake the traveller seems to have committed was that, by his ignorance of the rules of ablution, he made men agree that he was no saint but a madman. End of footnote. And, in the mean season, divers times, sent him secretly much good meat by her maidens. He seems to have played his part to some purpose under the colour of madness, converting a great fat sheep to Mohammedanism, killing an ass because he refused to be a proselyte, and finally he handled a Jew so ill that he had almost killed him. After sundry adventures and a trip to Sana'a, he started for Persia with the Indian fleet, in which, by means of fair promises, he had made friendship with a certain captain. He visited Zela and Berbera in the Somali country, and at last reached Hormuz. The 3rd book entreateth of Persia, the 4th of India and of the cities and other notable things seen there. The 8th book contains the Voyage of India, in which he includes Pegu, Sumatra, Borneo and Java, where, abhorring the beastly manners of a cannibal population, he made but a short stay. Returning to Calicut, he used great subtlety, escaped to the Portugales, and was well received by the Viceroy. After describing in his 7th book the voyage or navigation of Ethiopia, Melinda, Mombasa, Mozambique, and Zafala, Sofala, he passed the cape called Caput Bona Spei, and repaired to the goodly city of Luxburn, Lisbon, where he had the honour of kissing hands. The king confirmed with his great seal the letters patentes, whereby his lieutenant, the Viceroy of India, had given the pilgrim the order of knighthood. And thus, says Barthema by way of conclusion, departing from thence with the king's passport and safe conduct, at the length after these my long and great travails and dangers, I came to my long desired native country, the city of Rome, by the grace of God, to whom be all honour and glory. This old traveller's pages abound with the information to be collected in a fresh field by an unscrupulous and hard-headed observer. They are, of course, disfigured with a little romancing. His Jews at Cabor near Al-Madinah were 5 or 6 spans long. At Mecca he saw 2 unicorns, the younger at the age of 1 year and like a young colt. The horn of this is the length of 4 handfuls. Footnote. He proceeds, however, to say that the head is like a hart's, the legs thin and slender, like a fawn or hide, the hoofs divided much like the feet of a goat, that they were sent from Ethiopia, the Somali country, and were showed to the people for a miracle. They might therefore possibly have been African antelopes, which a lusus naturae had deprived of their second horn, but the suspicion of fable remains. End of footnote. And so credulous is he about anthropophagy, that he relates of Muhammad, son to the Sultan of Sana'a, how he, by a certain natural tyranny and madness, delighteth to eat men's flesh, and therefore secretly killeth many to eat them. Footnote. This is a tale not unfamiliar to the Western world. Louis XI of France was supposed to drink the blood of babes pour rajeunir sa veine épuisée. The reasons in favour of such unnatural diet have been fully explained by the infamous Marquis de Sade. End of footnote. But all things well considered, Ludovico Barthema, for correctness of observation and readiness of wit, stands in the foremost rank of the old Oriental travellers. I proceed to quote and to illustrate with notes the few chapters devoted in the first volume of this little-known work to Mecca and Al-Madinah. Chapter 11. Of a mountain inhabited with Jews, and of the city of Medinat-el-Nabi, where Muhammad was buried. In the space of 8 days we came to a mountain which containeth in circuit 10 or 12 miles. This is inhabited with Jews, to the number of 5,000 or thereabout. They are very little stature, as of the height of 5 or 6 spans, of some much less. They have small voices like women, and of black colour, yet some blacker than other. They feed of none other meat than goats' fleshes. Footnote. This is to the present day a food confined to the Bedouin. End of footnote. They are circumcised, and deny not themselves to be Jews. If by chance any Mahometan come into their hands, they flay him alive. At the foot of the mountain we found a certain hole, out of which flowed abundance of water. By finding this opportunity, we laded 16,000 camels, which thing greatly offended the Jews. They wandered in that mountain, scattered like wild goats or prickets, yet durst they not come down, partly for fear, and partly for hatred against the Mahometans. Beneath the mountain are seen 7 or 8 thorn trees, very fair, and in them we found a pair of turtle doves, which seemed to us in manner a miracle, having before made so long journeys, and saw neither beast nor fowl. Then proceeding 2 days' journey, we came to a certain city named Medinat-el-Nabi. 4 miles from the said city we found a well. Here the caravana, that is, the whole herd of camels, rested, and remaining here 1 day, we washed ourselves, and changed our shirts, the more freshly to enter into the city. It is well peopled, and containeth about 300 houses. The walls are like bulwarks of earth, and the houses both of stone and brick. The soil about the city is utterly barren, except that about 2 miles from the city are seen about 50 palm trees that bear dates. Footnote. This alludes to the gardens of Kuba. The number of date trees is now greatly increased. See chapter 19. End of footnote. There, by a certain garden, runneth a course of water falling into a lower plain, where also passengers are accustomed to water their camels. Footnote. The Ain al-Zarqa, flowing from the direction of Kuba. Chapter 18. End of footnote. And here opportunity now serveth to confute the opinion of them which think that the ark or tomb of wicked Mahomet to hang in the air, not borne up with anything. As touching which thing I am utterly of another opinion, and affirm this neither to be true, nor to have any likeness of truth, as I presently beheld these things, and saw the place where Mahomet is buried, in the said city of Medinat-el-Nabi. For we tarried there 3 days, to come to the true knowledge of all these things. When we were desirous to enter into their temple, which they call Meschita, footnote, Masjid, a mosque, end of footnote, and all other churches by the same name, we could not be suffered to enter without a companion little or great. They, taking us by the hand, brought us to the place where they say Mahomet is buried. Chapter 12. Of the temple or chapel and sepulchre of Mahomet, and of his fellows. His temple is vaulted, and is 100 paces in length, 80 in breadth. The entry into it is by 2 gates. From the sides it is covered with 3 vaults. It is borne up with 400 columns or pillars of white brick. There are seen hanging lamps, about the number of 3,000. From the other part of the temple, in the first place of the Meschita, is seen a tower of the circuit of 5 paces, vaulted on every side, and covered with a cloth or silk, and is borne up with a grate of copper, curiously wrought, and distant from it 2 paces. And of them that go thither is seen as it were through a lattice. Footnote. Nothing can to more correct than this part of Bartama's description. Toward the left hand is the way to the tower, and when you come thither, you must enter by a narrower gate. On every side of those gates or doors are seen many books in manner of a library, on the one side 20, and on the other side 25. These contain the filthy traditions and life of Mahomet and his fellows. Within the said gate is seen a sepulchre, that is, a digged place, where they say Mahomet is buried and his fellows, which are these, Nabi, Bubakar, Othomar, Aumar, and Fatima. Footnote. Nabi, the Prophet, Abu Bakr, Osman, Omar, and Fatima. It was never believed that Osman was buried in the Prophet's mosque. This part of the description is utterly incorrect. The tombs are within the tower above mentioned, and Bartama, in his 13th chapter, quoted below, seems to be aware of the fact. End of footnote. But Mahomet was their chief captain and an Arabian born. Ali was son-in-law to Mahomet, for he took to wife his daughter Fatima. Bubakar is he who they say was exalted to the dignity of a chief counsellor and great governor, although he came not to the high degree of an apostle or prophet, as did Mahomet. Othomar and Aumar were chief captains of the army of Mahomet. Every of these have their proper books of facts and traditions, and hereof proceedeth the great dissension and discord of religion and manners among this kind of filthy men, while some confirm one doctrine and some another, by reason of their diverse sects of patrons, doctors, and saints, as they call them. By this means they are marvellously divided among themselves, and like beasts kill themselves for such quarrels of diverse opinions and all faults. This also is the chief cause of war between the Sofi of Persia and the great Turk, being nevertheless both Mahometans, and live in mortal hatred one against the other for the maintenance of their sects, saints, and apostles, while every of them thinketh their own to be best. Chapter 13. Of the sect of Mahomet. Now will we speak of the manners and sect of Mahomet. Understand, therefore, that in the highest part of the tower aforesaid is an open round place. Now shall you understand what craft they use to deceive our caravans. The first evening that we came thither to see the sepulchre of Mahomet, our captain sent for the chief priest of the temple to come to him, and when he came, declared unto him that the only cause of his coming thither was to visit the sepulchre and body of Nabi, by which word is signified the Prophet Mahomet, and that he understood that the price to be admitted to the sight of these mysteries should be 4,000 seraphs of gold. Also, that he had no parents, neither brothers, sisters, kinfolks, children, or wives. Neither that he came thither to buy merchandise as spices, or bacca, or nardus, or any manner of precious jewels, but only for very zeal of religion and salutation of his soul, and was therefore greatly desirous to see the body of the Prophet. To whom the priest of the temple, they called him sighed, with countenance like one that were distraught. Footnote. The request was an unconscionable one, and the chief priest knew that the body, being enclosed within 4 walls, could not be seen. End of footnote. Made answer in this manner: Darest thou with those eyes, with the which thou hast committed so many horrible sins, desire to see him by whose sight God hath created heaven and earth? To whom again our captain answered thus: My lord, you have said truly. Nevertheless, I pray you that I may find so much favour with you that I may see the Prophet, whom, when I have seen, I will immediately thrust out mine eyes. The side answered, O Prince, I will open all things unto thee. So it is that no man can deny but that our Prophet died here, who, if he would, might have died at Mecca. But to show in himself a token of humility, and thereby to give us example to follow him, was willing rather here than elsewhere to depart out of this world, and was incontinent of angels born into heaven, and there received as equal with them. Then our captain said to him, Where is Jesus Christus, the son of Marie? To whom the side answered, At the feet of Mahomet. Footnote. This is incorrect. Hazrat Isa, after his second coming, will be buried in the Prophet's Hujra, but no Muslim ever believed that the founder of Christianity left his corpse in this world. See chapter 16. End of footnote. Then said our captain again, It sufficeth, it sufficeth, I will know no more. After this, our captain coming out of the temple, and turning to us, said, See, I pray you, for what goodly stuff I would have paid 3,000 seraphs of gold. The same day at evening, at almost 3 o'clock of the night, 10 or 12 of the elders of the sect of Mahomet entered into our caravana, which remained not past a stone cast from the gate of the city. Footnote. Most probably in the Bar al-Manakah, where the Damascus caravan still pitches tents. End of footnote. These ran hither and thither, crying like madmen, with these words, Mahomet, the messenger and apostle of God, shall rise again. O Prophet, O God, Mahomet shall rise again. Have mercy on us, God. Our captain and we, all raised with this cry, took weapon with all expedition, suspecting that the Arabians were come to rob our caravana. We asked what was the cause of that exclamation, and what they cried, for they cried as do the Christians when suddenly any marvellous thing chanceth. The elders answered, Saw you not the lightning which shone out of the sepulchre of the Prophet Mahomet? Footnote. This passage shows the antiquity of the still popular superstition which makes a light to proceed from the Prophet's tomb. End of footnote. Our captain answered that he saw nothing, and we also, being demanded, answered in like manner. Then said one of the old men, Are you slaves? That is to say, bought men, meaning thereby Mamelukes. Then said our captain, We are indeed Mamelukes. Then again the old man said, You, my lords, cannot see heavenly things, as being neophiti, that is, newly come to the faith, and not yet confirmed in our religion. To this our captain answered again, O you mad and insensate beasts, I had thought to have given you 3,000 pieces of gold, but now, O you dogs and progeny of dogs, I will give you nothing. It is therefore to be understood that none other shining came out of the sepulchre than a certain flame which the priests caused to come out of the open place of the tower. Footnote. It is unnecessary to suppose any deception of the kind. If only the Illuminati could see this light, the sight would necessarily be confined to a very small number. End of footnote. Spoken of here before, whereby they would have deceived us, and therefore our captain commanded that thereafter none of us should enter into the temple. Of this also we have most true experience, and most certainly assure you that there is neither iron or steel, or the manganese stone, that should so make the tomb of Mahomet to hang in the air, as some have falsely imagined. Neither is there any mountain nearer than 4 miles. We remained here 3 days to refresh our company. To this city, victuals and all kind of corn is brought from Arabia Felix, and Babylon or Alcaire, and also from Ethiopia, by the Red Sea, which is from this city but 4 days' journey. Footnote. This account is correct. Qusair, Suez and Jeddah still supply Al-Madinah. End of footnote. Chapter 14. The Journey to Mecca. Footnote. It is impossible to distinguish from this description the route taken by the Damascus caravan in AD 1503. Of one thing only we may be certain, namely, that between Al-Madinah and Mecca there are no seas of sand. End of footnote. After we were satisfied, or rather wearied, with the filthiness and loathsomeness of the trumperies, deceits, trifles and hypocrisies of the religion of Mahomet, we determined to go forward on our journey, and that by guiding of a pilot who might direct our course with the mariner's box or compass, with also the card of the sea, even as is used in sailing on the sea. And thus, bending our journey to the west, we found a very fair well or fountain, from the which flowed great abundance of water. The inhabitants affirm that St. Mark the Evangelist was the author of this fountain, by a miracle of God, when that region was in manner burned with incredible dryness. Footnote: the name of St. Mark is utterly unknown in Al-Hijaz. Probably the origin of the fountain described in the text was a theory that sprang from the brains of the Christian Mamluks. End of footnote. Here we and our beasts were satisfied with drink. I may not here omit to speak of the sea of sand and of the dangers thereof. This was found of us before we came to the mountain of the Jews. In this sea of sand we travelled the journey of 3 days and nights. This is a great broad plain, all covered with white sand, in manner as small as flour. If by evil fortune it so chanced that any travel that way southward, if in the meantime the wind come to the north, they are overwhelmed with sand, that they scatter out of the way, and can scarcely see the one the other 10 paces off. And therefore the inhabitants travelling this way are enclosed in cages of wood, borne with camels, and live in them. Footnote: a fair description of the still favourite vehicles, the shugduf, tact rawan, and the shibria. It is almost needless to say that the use of the mariner's compass is unknown to the guides in Al-Hijaz. End of footnote. So passing the journey, guided by pilots with mariner's compass and card, even as on the sea, as we have said. In this journey also many perish for thirst, and many for drinking too much when they find such good waters. In these sands is found momia, which is the flesh of such men as are drowned in these sands, and there dried by the heat of the sun, so that those bodies are preserved from putrefaction by the dryness of the sand, and therefore that dry flesh is esteemed medicinable. Footnote: wonderful tales are still told about this same momia, mummy. I was assured by an Arab physician that he had broken a fowl's leg and bound it tightly with a cloth containing man's dried flesh, which caused the bird to walk about with a sound shank on the 2nd day. End of footnote. Albeit there is another kind of more precious momia, which is the dried and embalmed bodies of kings and princes, which of long time have been preserved dry without corruption. When the wind bloweth from the north-east, then the sand riseth, and is driven against a certain mountain, which is an arm of the Mount Sinai. Footnote: this is probably Jabal Warkan, on the Darb al-Sultani, or sea road to Mecca. For the Muslim tradition about its Sinaitic origin, see chapter 20. End of footnote. There we found certain pillars artificially wrought, which they call Yan Yuan. On the left hand of the said mountain, in the top or ridge thereof, is a den, and the entry into it is by an iron gate. Some feign that in that place Mahomet lived in contemplation. Here we heard a certain horrible noise and cry, for passing the said mountain we were in so great danger that we thought never to have escaped. Departing therefore from the fountain, we continued our journey for the space of 10 days, and twice in the way fought with 50,000 Arabians, and so at the length came to the city of Mecca, where all things were troubled by reason of the wars between two brethren, contending which of them should possess the kingdom of Mecca. End of Appendix 4, Part 1.
Appendix 4 of Personal Narrative of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah by Richard Francis Burton. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Appendix 4 of Personal Narrative of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah by Richard Francis Burton. The Navigation and Voyages of Ludovicus Vertomannus, Gentleman of Rome, A.D. 1503, Part 2. Chapter 15 of the form and situation of the city of Mecca, and why the Mahometans resort thither. Now the time requireth to speak somewhat of the famous city of Mecca, or Mecca, what it is, how it is situate, and by whom it is governed. The city is very fair and well inhabited, and containeth in round form 6,000 houses, as well builded as ours, and some that cost 3,000 or 4,000 pieces of gold. It hath no walls. About 2 furlongs from the city is a mount. Footnote: This is probably Jabal Warqan on the Darb al-Sultani or sea road to Mecca. For the Muslim tradition about its Sinaitic origin, see chapter 20. And a footnote. Where the way is cut out, which leadeth to a plain beneath, it is on every side fortified with mountains, in the stead of walls or bulwarks, and hath 4 entries. The governor is a Sultan, and one of the 4 brethren of the progeny of Mahomet, and is subject to the Sultan of Babylon, of whom we have spoken before. His other 3 brethren be at continual war with him. The 18th day of May, we entered into the city by the north side, then by a declining way we came into a plain. On the south side are 2 mountains, the one very near, the other distant only by a little valley, which is the way that leadeth to the gate of Mecca. On the east side is an open place between 2 mountains, like into a valley. Footnote. The Saniyat Kuda, a pass opening upon the Mecca plain. Here 2 towers are now erected. End of footnote. And is the way to the mountain where they sacrificed to the patriarchs Abraham and Isaac. Footnote. An error. The sacrifice is performed at Muna, not on Arafat, the mountain here alluded to. End of footnote. This mountain is from the city about 10 or 12 miles, and the height of 3 stones cast. It is of stone and as hard as marble, yet no marble. Footnote. The material is a close grey granite. End of footnote. In the top of the mountain is a temple, or meskita, made after their fashion, and hath 3 ways to enter into it. Footnote. The form of the building has now been changed. End of footnote. At the foot of the mountain are 2 cisterns, which conceals water without corruption. Of these, the one is reserved to minister water to the camels of the caravan of Babylon or Al-Cair, and the other for them of Damascus. It is rain water, and is derived far off. Footnote. The Meccans have a tradition concerning it, that it is derived from Baghdad. End of footnote. But to return to speak of the city, for as touching the manner of sacrifice which they use at the foot of the mountain, we will speak hereafter. Entering therefore into the city, we found there the caravana of Memphis or Babylon, which prevented us 8 days, and came not the way that we came. This caravana contained 64,000 camels, and 100 Mamluks to guide them. And here ought you to consider that, by the opinion of all men, this city is greatly cursed of God, as apparently by the great barrenness thereof, for it is destitute of all manners of fruits and corn. Footnote. Muslims who are disposed to be facetious on serious subjects often remark that it is a mystery why Allah should have built his house in a spot so barren and desolate. End of footnote. It is scorched with dryness for lack of water, and therefore the water is there grown to such a price that you cannot for 12 pence buy as much water as will satisfy your thirst for 1 day. Now therefore I will declare that what provision they have for victuals, the most part is brought them from the city of Babylon, otherwise named Memphis, Cairo, or Al-Cair, a city of the river of Nilus in Egypt, as we have said before, and is brought by the Red Sea, called Meyer Erythrium, from a certain port named Gidda, distant from Mecca 40 miles. Footnote. This is still correct. Suez supplies Jeddah with corn and other provisions. End of footnote. The rest of their provisions is brought from Arabia Felix, that is, the happy or blessed Arabia, so named for the fruitfulness thereof, in respect of the other 2 Arabias, called Petrea and Deserta, that is, stone and desert. They have also much corn from Ethiopia. Here we found marvellous number of strangers and peregrines or pilgrims, of the which some came from Syria, some from Persia, and other from both the East Indies, that is to say, both India within the river of Ganges, and also the other India without the same river. I never saw in any place greater abundance and frequentation of people, for as much as I could perceive, by tarrying there the space of 20 days. These people resort thither for divers causes, as some for merchandise, some to observe their vow of pilgrimage, and others to have pardon for their sins, as touching the which we will speak more hereafter. Chapter 17. Of the pardons or indulgences of Mecca. Now, let us return to speak of the pardons of the pilgrims, for which so many strange nations resort thither. In the midst of the city is a temple, in fashion like unto the Colossus of Rome, the amphitheatrum, I mean, like unto a stage, yet not of marble or hewed stones, but of burnt bricks. For this temple, like unto an amphitheatre, hath fourscore and 10, or 100 gates, and is vaulted. Footnote: a prodigious exaggeration. Burckhardt enumerates 20. The principal gates are 17 in number. In the old building they were more numerous. Joseph Pitt says it hath about 40 doors to enter into it, not so much, I think, for necessity, as figure, for in some places they are close by one another. End of footnote. The entrance is by a descent of 12 stairs or degrees in every part. Footnote: Bartema alludes probably to the Bab Ziyada in the northern enceinte. End of footnote. In the church porch are sold only jewels and precious stones. In the entry the gilded walls shine on every side with incomparable splendor. In the lower part of the temple, that is under the vaulted places, is seen a marvelous multitude of men. For there are 5 or 6,000 men that sell none other thing than sweet ointments, and especially a certain odoriferous and most sweet powder, wherewith dead bodies are embalmed. Footnote: I saw nothing of the kind, though consistently, in the Haram at Meccah. End of footnote. And hence all manner of sweet savours are carried in manner into the countries of all the Mahometans. It passeth all belief to think of the exceeding sweetness of these savours, far surmounting the shops of the apothecaries. The 23rd day of May the pardons began to be granted in the temple, and in what manner we will now declare. The temple in the midst is open without any enclosing, and in the midst also thereof is a turret of largeness of 6 passes in circuit. Footnote: the Kaaba is an oblong massive structure, 18 paces in length, 14 in breadth, and from 35 to 40 feet in height. Burckhardt, Volume 1, page 248. My measurements, concerning which more hereafter, gave 18 paces in breadth and 22 in length. End of footnote. And involued or hanged with cloth or tapestry of silk. Footnote: in ancient times possibly it was silk, now it is of silk and cotton mixed. End of footnote. And passeth not the height of a man. They enter into the turret by a gate of silver, and is on every side beset with vessels full of balm. On the day of Pentecost license is granted to all men to see these things. The inhabitants affirm that balm or balsam to be part of the treasure of the Sultan, that is the Lord of Meccah. At every vault of the turret is fastened a round circle of iron, like the ring of a door. Footnote: these are the brazen rings which serve to fasten the lower edge of the kiswa, or the covering. End of footnote. On the 22nd day of May a great multitude of people began, early in the morning before day, 7 times to walk about the turret, kissing every corner thereof, oftentimes feeling and handling them. From this turret, about 10 or 12 paces, is on other turret, like a chapel, builded after a manner. This hath 3 or 4 entries. In the midst thereof is a well of 60 cubits deep. The water of this well is infected with saltpeter or salt nitre. Footnote: a true description of the water of the well Zemzem. End of footnote. Egypt men are thereunto appointed to draw water for all the people, and when a multitude of people have 7 times gone round about the first turret, they come to this well, and touching the mouth or the brim thereof, they say, Be it in the honour of God, God pardon me and forgive me my sins. When these words are said, they that draw the water pour 3 buckets of water on the heads of every one of them, and stand near about the well, and wash them all wet from head to foot, although they be apparelled with silk. Then doting fools dream that they are clean from all their sins, and their sins are forgiven them. They say furthermore that the first turret whereof we have spoken was the first house that ever Abraham builded, and therefore while they are yet all wet of the said washing, they go to the mountain, where, as we have said before, they are accustomed to sacrifice to Abraham. Footnote: there is great confusion in this part of Bartema's narrative. On the 9th of Dhul-Hijjah, the pilgrims leave Mount Arafat. On the 10th, many hasten into Mecca and enter the Kaaba. They then return to the valley of Muna, where their tents are pitched, and they sacrifice the victims. On the 12th, the tents are struck, and the pilgrims re-enter Mecca. And remaining there 2 days, they make the said sacrifice to Abraham at the foot of the mountain. Chapter 18. The manner of sacrificing at Mecca. Forasmuch as for the most part noble spirits are delighted with novelties of great and strange things, therefore to satisfy their expectation I will describe their manner of sacrificing. Therefore when they intend to sacrifice, some of them kill 3 sheep, some 4 and 10, so that the butchery sometimes so floweth with blood that in one sacrifice are slain about 3,000 sheep. They are slain at the rising of the sun, and shortly after are distributed to the poor for God's sake. For I saw there a great and confounded multitude of poor people, as to the number of 20,000. These make many and long ditches in the fields, where they keep fire with camel's dung, and roast or seethe the flesh that is given them, and eat it even there. I believe that these poor people came thither rather for hunger than for devotion, which I think by this conjecture, that great abundance of cucumbers are brought thither from Arabia Felix, which they ate, casting away the paranges without their houses or tabernacles, where a multitude of the said poor people gather them, even out of the mire and the sand, and eat them, and are so greedy of these paranges that they fight who may gather most. This well describes the wretched state of the poor Takruri and other Africans, but it attributes them an unworthy motive. I once asked a learned Arab what induced the wretches to rush upon destruction as they do, when the faith renders pilgrimage obligatory only upon those who can afford necessaries for the way. By Allah, he replied, there is fire within their hearts, which can be quenched only at God's house and at his Prophet's tomb. The day following, Bartema alludes to the day of Arafat, 9th of Dhul-Hijjah, which precedes, not follows, the day of sacrifice. Their Qadi, which are in place with them, as with us the preachers of God's word, ascended into a high mountain, to preach to the people that remaineth beneath, and preached to them in their language the space of an hour. The sum of the sermon was, that with tears they should bewail their sins, and beat their breasts with sighs and lamentation. And for the preacher himself with loud voice spake these words: O Abraham, beloved of God! O Isaac, chosen of God, and his friend, pray to God for the people of Nebi. When these words were said, suddenly we heard lamenting voices. When the sermon was done, a rumour was spreaded that a great army of Arabians to the number of 20,000 were coming, with which news that they kept the caravans, being greatly feared, with all speed like madmen fled into the city of Mecca, and we again, bearing news of the Arabians' approach, fled also into the cities. But while we were in the midway between the mountain and Mecca, we came by a despicable wall, of the breadth of 4 cubits. The people passing this wall had covered the way with stones, and cause whereof they say to be this: when Abraham was commanded to sacrifice his son, he willed his son Isaac to follow him to the place where he should execute the commandment of God. As Isaac went to follow his father, there appeared to him in the way a devil, in likeness of a fair and friendly person, not far from the said wall, and asked him friendly whither he went. Isaac answered that he went to his father, who tarried for him. To this the enemy of mankind answered that it was best for him to tarry, and if that he went any further, his father would sacrifice him. But Isaac, nothing fearing this advertisement of the devil, went forward, that his father on him might execute the commandment of God. And with this answer, as they say, the devil departed. Yet as Isaac went forward, the devil appeared to him again in the likeness of another friendly person, and forbade him as before. Then Isaac, taking up a stone in that place, hurled it at the devil, and wounded him in the forehead. in witness and remembrance whereof the people passing that way, when they come near the wall, are accustomed to cast stones against it, and from thence go into the city. Bartama alludes to the Shaitan al-Kibir, or the Great Devil, as the buttress of Al-Munah is called. His account of Satan's appearance is not strictly correct. Most Muslims believe that Abraham threw the stone at the regime, the lapidated one, but there are various traditions upon the subject. As we went this way, the air was in manner darkened with a multitude of stock doves. They say that these doves are of the progeny of the dove that spake in the ear of Mahomet in likeness of the Holy Ghost. A Christian version of an obscure Muslim legend about a white dove alighting on the Prophet's shoulder and appearing to whisper in his ear whilst he was addressing a congregation. Butler alludes to it. The apostles of this fierce religion, like Mahomet's, were ass and widgeon, the latter word being probably a clerical error for pigeon. When describing the Kaaba, I shall have occasion to allude to the blue rocks of Mecca. These are seen everywhere, as in the villages, houses, taverns, and granaries of corn and rice, and are so tame that one can scarcely drive them away. To take them or kill them is esteemed a thing worthy death, and therefore a certain pension is given to nourish them in the temple. No one would eat the pigeons of the Kaaba, but in other places, Al-Madinah for instance, they are sometimes used as article of food. Chapter 20. Of divers things which chanced to me in Mecca, and of Zidda, a port of Mecca. It may seem good here to make mention of certain things in which is seen sharpness of wit in the case of urgent necessity, which hath no law, as saith the proverb. For I was driven to the point how I might privily escape from Mecca. Therefore, whereas my captain gave me charge to buy certain things, as I was in the market-place, a certain Mamluk knew me to be a Christian, and therefore in his own language spake unto me these words: Enta min, that is, where art thou? In the vulgar dialect, Ant minen. To whom I answered that I was a Mahometan. But he said, Thou sayest not truly. I said again, By the head of Mahomet, I am a Mahometan. Then he said again, Come home to my house. I followed him willingly. When we were there, he began to speak to me in the Italian tongue, and asked me again from whence I was, affirming that he knew me, and that I was no Mahometan; also that he had been some time in Geneva and Venice, and that his words might be better believed. He rehearsed many things which testified that he said truth. When I understood this, I confessed freely that I was a Romain, but professed to the faith of Mahomet in the city of Babylon, and there made one of the Mamluks, whereof he seemed greatly to rejoice, and therefore used me honourably. But because my desire was yet to go further, I asked the Mahometan whether that city of Mecca was so famous as all the world spake of it, and inquired of him where was the great abundance of pearls, precious stones, spices, and other rich merchandise that the bruit went of to be in that city. And all my talk was to the end to grope the mind of the Mahometan, that I might know the cause why such things were not brought thither as in time past. But to avoid all suspicion, I durst here make no mention of the dominion which the King of Portugal had in the most part of that ocean, and of the gulfs of the Red Sea and Persia. Then he began with more attentive mind, in order to declare unto me the cause what Mart was not so greatly frequented as it had been before, and laid the only fault thereof in the King of Portugal. But when he made mention of the king, I began of purpose to detract his fame, lest Mahometan might think that I rejoiced that the Christians came thither for merchandise. When he perceived that I was of profession an enemy to the Christians, he had met me yet in greater estimation, and proceeded to tell many things more. When I was well instructed in all things, I spake unto him friendly these words in the Mahometan language: Munabba min al-Habib, that is to say, I pray you assist me. I confess inability to explain these words. The printer has probably done more than the author to make him unintelligible. Atmannik min al-Nabi in vulgar tongue and rather corrupt Arabic would mean, I beg you to aid me for the sake of the Prophet. And a footnote. He asked me wherein? To help me, I said, how I may secretly depart hence, confirming by great others that I would go to those kings that were most enemies to the Christians, affirming furthermore that I knew certain secrets greatly to be esteemed, which if they were known to the said kings, I doubted not but that in short time I should be sent for from Meccah. Astonished at these words, he said unto me, I pray you, what art or secret do you know? I answered that I would give place to no man in making of all manner of guns and artillery. Then said he, Praised be Muhammad who sent thee hither, to do him and his saints good service, and willed me to remain secretly in his house with his wife, and required me earnestly to obtain leave of our captain, that under his name he might lead from Meccah 15 camels laden with spices, without paying any custom, for they ordinarily pay to the Sultan 30 sarafs of gold. Footnote: Ashrafi or ducats. End of footnote. For transporting of such merchandise for the change of so many camels. I put him in good hope of his request. He greatly rejoiced, although he would ask for 100, affirming that might easily be obtained by the privileges of the Mamluks, and therefore desired him that I might feel safe remain in his house. Then nothing doubting to obtain his request, he greatly rejoiced, and talking with me yet more freely, gave me further instructions, and counselled me to repair a certain king of the greater India, in the kingdom and realm of the Sham. Footnote: the Deccan. End of footnote. Wherefore we will speak hereafter. Therefore, the day before the caravana departed from Meccah, he willed me to lie hid in the most secret part of his house. The day following, early in the morning, the trumpeter of the caravana gave warning to all the Mamluks to make ready their horses, to direct their journey towards Syria, with proclamation of death to all that should refuse to do so. When I heard the sound of the trumpet, and was advertised of the straight commandment, I was marvellously troubled in mind, and with heavy countenance desired the Mahometan's wife not to beware of me, and with earnest prayer committed myself to the mercy of God. On the Tuesday following, our caravana departed from Meccah, and I remained in the Mahometan's house with his wife, but he followed the caravana. Yet before he departed, he gave commandment to his wife to bring me to the caravana, which should depart from Zidda, the port of Meccah. Footnote: Jeddah. End of footnote. This port is distant from Meccah 40 miles. Whilst I lay thus hid in the Mahometan's house, I cannot express how friendly his wife used me. This also furthered my good entertainment, that there was in the house a fair young maid, the niece of the Mahometan, who was greatly in love with me. But at that time, in the midst of the house troubles and fear, the fire of Venus was almost extinct in me, and therefore with dalliances of fair words and promises I still kept myself in her favour. Therefore the Friday following, about noontide, I departed, following the caravana of India, and about midnight we came to a certain village of the Arabians, and there remained the rest of that night, and the next day till noon. From hence we went forward on our journey towards Zidda, and came thither in the silence of the night. The city hath no walls, yet fair houses, somewhat after the building of Italy. There is great abundance of all kind of merchandise, by reason of resort in manner of all nations thither, except Jews and Christians, to whom it is not lawful to come thither. As soon as I entered into the city, I went into their temple or mezquita, where I saw a great multitude of poor people, as about the number of 25,000, attending a certain pilot who should bring them into their country. Here I suffered much trouble and affliction, being enforced to hide myself among these poor folks, feigning myself very sick, to the end that none should be inquisitive what I was, whence I came, or whither I would. The lord of this city is the Sultan of Babylon, brother of the Sultan of Meccah, who is his subject. The inhabitants are Mahometans. The soil is unfruitful, and lacketh fresh water. The sea beateth against the town. There is nevertheless abundance of all things, but brought thither from other places, as from Babylon of Nilus, Arabia Felix, and divers other places. The heat is here so great that men are in manner dried up therewith, and therefore there is ever a great number of sick folks. The city containeth about 500 houses. After 15 days were past, I contacted a pilot who was ready to depart from thence into Persia, and agreed of the price to go with him. There lay at anchor in the haven almost 100 brigantines and foisters. A foist or bust was a kind of felucca, partially decked. With divers boats and barks of sundry sorts, both with oars and without oars. Therefore, after 3 days, giving wind to our sails, we entered into the Red Sea, otherwise named Mare Erythraeum. End of Appendix 4, Part 2. Appendix 5 of Personal Narrative of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Appendix 5 of Personal Narrative of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah by Richard Francis Burton. The Pilgrimage of Joseph Pitts to Mecca and Al-Madinah, AD 1680. Part 1. Our second pilgrim was Joseph Pitts of Exon. It is curious, as Crichton, in Arabia Volume 2, page 208, observes that Gibbon seems not to have seen or known anything of the little work published by Pitts on his return home. It is entitled A Faithful Account of the Religion and the Manners of the Mahometans, in which is a particular relation of their pilgrimage to Mecca and the place of Mahomet's birth, and description of Medina and his tomb there, etc., etc. My copy is the 4th edition, printed for T. Longman and R. Hett, London, A.D. 1708. The only remarkable feature in the getting up of the little octavo is, that the engraving headed "The most sacred and ancient temple of the Mahometans at Mecca" is the reverse of the impression. A youth 15 or 16 years old, when in A.D. 1678 his genius leading him to be a sailor and see foreign countries caused him to be captured by an Algerine pirate. After living in slavery for some years, he was taken by his patroon to Mecca and Al-Madinah via Alexandria, Rosetta, Cairo, and Suez. His description of these places is accurate in the main points, and though tainted with prejudice and bigotry, he is free from superstition and credulity. Conversant with Turkish and Arabic, he has required more knowledge of the tenets and the practice of Al-Islam than his predecessor, and the term of his residence at Algiers, 15 years, sufficed, despite the defects of his education, to give fullness and finish to his observation. His chief patroon, captain of a troop of horse, was a profligate and debauched man in his time, and a murderer, who determined to proselyte a Christian slave as an atonement for past impieties. He began by large offers and failed. He succeeded by dint of a great cudgel repeatedly applied to Joseph Pitts' bare feet. I roared out, says the relator, to feel the pain of his cruel strokes, but the more I cried, the more furiously he laid on, and to stop the noise of my crying, would stamp with his feet on my mouth. At last, through terror, he turned and spake the words La ilaha, etc., as usual, holding up the forefinger of the right hand. Then he was circumcised in due form. Of course, such conversion was not a sincere one. There was yet swine's flesh in his teeth. He boasts of saying his prayers in a state of impurity, hates his fellow religionists, was truly pleased to hear Mahomet called Sabatero, i.e. shoemaker, reads his Bible, talks of the horrid evil of apostasy, calls the Prophet a bloody impostor, eats heartily in private of hog, and is very much concerned for one of his countrymen who went home to his own country, but came again to Algiers, and voluntarily, without the least force used towards him, became a Mahometan. His first letter from his father reached him some days after he had been compelled by his patron's barbarity to abjure his faith. One sentence appears particularly to have afflicted him, was this: "To have a care and keep close to God, and to be sure never by any methods of cruelty that could be used towards me be prevailed to deny my blessed Saviour, and that he the Father would rather hear of my death than of me being a Mahometan." Indeed, throughout the work it appears that his repentance was sincere. "God be merciful to me, a sinner," is the deprecation that precedes the account of his turning Turk, and the book concludes with, "To him therefore, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three persons and one God, be all honour, glory, and praise, world without end. Amen." Having received from his patron, whom he acknowledges to have been a second parent to him, a letter of freedom at Meccah, and having entered into pay, still living with his master, Pitts began to think of escape. The Grand Turk had sent to Algiers for ships, and the renegade was allowed to embark on board one of them, provided with a diplomatic letter from Mr. Baker, consul of Algiers, to Mr. Ray, consul at Smyrna. Some years afterwards, Mr. Consul Baker, when waited upon by Pitts in London, gave him a copy of the letter, with the following memorandum upon the back of it: "Copy of my letter to Consul Ray at Smyrna, to favour the escape of Joseph Pitts, an English renegade from a squadron of Algiers men of war. Had my kindness to him been discovered by the government of Algiers, my legs and arms had first been broken, and my carcass burnt, a danger hitherto not courted by any." The devil, we are told, was very busy with him in the Levant, tempting him to lay aside all thoughts of escaping, to return to Algiers, and to continue a Mussulman; and the loss of 8 months' pay and certain other moneys seems to have weighed heavily upon his soul. Still he prepared for the desperate enterprise, in which failure would have exposed him to be dragged about the streets on the stone till half dead, and then be burned to ashes in the Jews' burial place. A generous friend, Mr. Eliot, a Cornish merchant, who had served some part of his apprenticeship in Exon, and had settled at Smyrna, paid £4 for his passage in a French ship to Leghorn. Therefrom, in the evening before sailing, he went on board, apparelled as an Englishman, with his beard shaven, a campaign periwig, and a cane in his hand, accompanied with 3 or 4 of his friends. At Leghorn he prostrated himself and kissed the earth, blessing Almighty God for his mercy and goodness to him, that he once more set footing on the European Christian part of the world. The italics in the text are the author's. This is admirably characteristic of the man. Asiatic Christendom would not satisfy him. He seems to hate the damnable doctrines of the Papists almost as much as those of the Moslems. He travelled through Italy, Germany, and Holland, where he received many and great kindnesses, but his patriotism was damped as he entered England, his own native country, and the civilized land must have made him for a time regret having left Algiers. The very first night he lay ashore he was impressed into the king's service, we having at that time war with France. Despite arguments and tears, he spent some days in Colchester jail, and finally he was put on board a smack to be carried to the Dreadnought man of war. But happily for himself, he had written to Sir William Falconer, one of the Smyrna or Turkey Company in London. That gentleman used his interest to procure a protection from the Admiralty Office, upon the receipt of which good news Joseph Pitts did rejoice exceedingly, and could not forbear leaping upon the deck. He went to London, thanked Sir William, and hurried down to Exeter, where he ends his 15 years' tale with a homely, heartful, and affecting description of his first meeting with his father. His mother died about a year before his return. The following passages are part of the 7th and 8th chapter of Pitt's little-known work. Next we came to Gidda, the nearest port town to Meccah, not quite 1 day's journey from it. He must have been accustomed to long days' journey. Al-Idrisi makes Jeddah 40 miles from Meccah. I calculated about 42. Here we are met by Delils, i.e. certain persons who came from Meccah on purpose to instruct the Hajjis or pilgrims in the ceremonies, most of them being ignorant of them, which are to be used in their worship at the temple there. Delil, a guide, generally called at Meccah Mutawwif. in the middle of which is a place which they call Beit Allah, i.e. the house of God. They say that Abraham built it, to which I give no credit. As soon as we come to the town of Mecca, the Dalil or guide carries us into the great street, which is in the midst of the town, and to which the temple joins. Pitt's note that before they'll provide for themselves, they serve God in their way. When the camels are laid down, he first directs us to the fountain, there to take abdes. Abdast is the Turkish word borrowed from the Persian for wuzu, the minor ablution. Which being done, he brings us to the temple, into which, having left our shoes with one who constantly attends to receive them, we enter at the door called Bab al-Salam, i.e. the welcome gate, or gate of peace. After a few paces entrance, the Dalil makes a stand and holds up his hands towards the Beit Allah, it being in the middle of the mosque. The Hajis imitating him and saying after him the same words which he speaks. At the very first sight of the Beit Allah, the Hajis melt into tears. Then we are led up to it, still speaking after the Dalil. Then we are led round it 7 times, and then to make 2 erkaets. Ruk'at, a bending. This 2-bow prayer is in honor of the mosque. This being done, we are led into the street again, where we are sometimes to run and sometimes to walk very quickly with the Dalil, from one place of the street to the other, about a bow shot. This is the ceremony technically called as-say, or running between Safa and Marwa. Burckhardt describes it accurately, volume 1, page 174 till 175. I profess I could not choose but admire to see those poor creatures so extraordinary devout and affectionate when they are about these superstitions, and with what awe and trembling they were possessed, insomuch that I could scarce forbear shedding of tears, to see their zeal, though blind and idolatrous. After all this is done, we return to the place in the street where we left our camels, with our provisions and necessaries, and then look out for lodgings, where when we came, we disrobe and take our hirawims, ihram, the pilgrim garb, and put on our ordinary clothes again. All the pilgrims hold it to their great duty well to improve their time whilst they are at Mecca, not to do their accustomed duty and devotion in the temple, but to spend all their leisure time there, and as far as strength will permit to continue at Tawaf, i.e. to walk around the Beit Allah, which is about 24 paces square. At one corner of the beat there is a black stone fastened and framed with silver plate, now gold or gilt, and every time they come to that corner they kiss the stone, and having gone round 7 times, they perform 2 erkaets namaz or prayer. This stone, they say, was formerly white, and then it was called Hajar Asad, i.e. the white stone. But by reason of the sins of the multitudes of people who kiss it, it is become black, and is now called Hajar Aswad, or the black stone. This is an error. The stone is called Hajar Aswad, or the black stone, or Hajar Asad, the blessed stone. Moreover, it did not change its color on account of the sins of the people who kissed it. This place is so much frequented by people going around it, that the place of the Tawaf, i.e. the circuit which they take in going around it, is seldom void of people at any time of the day or night. The Meccans in effect still make this a boast. Many have waited several weeks, nay months, for the opportunity of finding it so. For they say that if any person is blessed with such an opportunity, that for his or her zeal in keeping up the honor of the Tawaf, let they petition what they will at the Beit Allah, they shall be answered. Many will walk round till they are quite weary, then rest, and at it again, carefully remembering at the end of every 7th time to perform 2 erkaets. This beat is in effect the object of their devotion, the idol which they adore, for let them never be so far distant from it, east, west, north, or south of it, they will be sure to bow down towards it. But when they are at the beat, they may go on which side they please, and pay their salah towards it. Nothing more blindly prejudiced than this statement. Muslims turn towards Mecca as Christians towards Jerusalem. Sometimes there are several hundreds at Tawaf at once, especially after Aksham Namaz, or 4th time of service, which is after candle lighting, as you heard before. And these, both men and women, but the women walk on the outside the men, and the men nearest to the beat. In so great a resort as this, it is not to be supposed that every individual person can come to kiss the stone aforementioned. Therefore, in such a case, the lifting up the hands towards it, smoothing down their faces, and using a short expression of devotion, as Allah Waik Barik, i.e. blessed God, or Allah Kabur, i.e. great God, some such like, and so passing by it till opportunity of kissing it offers, is thought sufficient. Footnote: as will afterwards be explained, all the four orthodox schools do not think it necessary to kiss the stone after each circumambulation. End of footnote. But when there are but few men at Tawaf, then the women get opportunity to kiss the said stone, and when they have gotten it, they close in with it as they come round, and walk round as quick as they can to come to it again, and keep possession of it for a considerable time. The men, when they see that the women have got the place, will be so civil as to pass by and give them leave to take their fill, as I may say, in their tawaf or walking round, during which they are using some formal expressions. When the women are at the stone, then it is esteemed a very rude and abominable thing to go near them, respecting the time and place. I shall now give you a more peculiar description of Mecca and the temple there. First, as to Mecca, it is a town situated in a barren place, about 1 day's journey from the Red Sea, in a valley, or rather in the midst of many little hills. It is a place of no force, wanting both walls and gates. Its buildings are, as I said before, very ordinary, insomuch that it would be a place of no tolerable entertainment, were it not for the anniversary resort of so many thousand Hagges, or pilgrims, on whose coming the whole dependence of the town in a manner is, for many shops are scarcely open all the year besides. The people here, I observed, are poor sort of people, very thin, lean, and swarthy. The town is surrounded for several miles with many thousands of little hills, which are very near one to the other. I have been on the top of some of them near Mecca, where I could see some miles about, yet was not able to see the farthest of the hills. They are all stony rock and blackish, and pretty near of bigness, appearing at a distance like cocks of hay, but all pointing towards Mecca. Some of them are half a mile in circumference, but all near of one height. The people here have an odd and foolish sort of tradition concerning them, viz., that when Abraham went about building the Bayt Allah, God, by his wonderful providence, did so order it, that every mountain in the world should contribute something to the building thereof, and accordingly every one did send its proportion, though there is a mountain near Algiers, which is called Karadok, i.e. Black Mountain. And the reason of its blackness, they say, is because it did not send any part of itself towards the building of the temple at Mecca. Footnote: these are mere local traditions. The original Kaaba was composed of materials gathered from the 6 mountains of Paradise, chapter 20. The present building is of grey granite quarried in a hill near Mecca. End of footnote. Between these hills is good and plain travelling, though they stand one to another. There is upon the top of one of them a cave, which they term Hira, i.e. blessing. Footnote: now Jabal Nur. End of footnote. Into which they say Mahomet did usually retire for his solitary devotions, meditations, and fastings, and here they believe he had a great part of the Al-Quran brought to him by the angel Gabriel. I have been in this cave and observed that it is not at all beautified, at which I admired. About half a mile out of Mecca is a very steep hill, and there are stairs made to go to the top of it, where there is a cupola, under which is a cloven rock. Into this, they say, Mahomet, when very young, viz. about 4 years of age, was carried by the angel Gabriel, who opened his breast and took out his heart, from which he picked some black blood specks, which was his original corruption, then put it into its place again, and afterwards closed up the part, and that during this operation Mahomet felt no pain. Into this very place I myself went, because the rest of my company did so, and performed some erkads, as they did. The town hath plenty of water, and yet but few herbs, unless in some particular places. Here are several sorts of good fruits to be had, viz. grapes, melons, watermelons, cucumbers, pumpkins, and the like, but these are brought 2 or 3 days' journey off. where there is a place of very great plenty, called, if I mistake not, Habbash. Footnote. They come from the well-known Taif, which the country people call Hijaz, but never Habbash. The word Taif literally means a circumambulator. It is said that when Adam settled at Mecca, finding the country barren, he prayed to Allah to supply him with a bit of fertile land. Immediately appeared a mountain, which, having performed tawaf round the Kaaba, settled itself down eastward of Mecca. Hence, to the present day, Taif is called Qita' min ash-Sham, a piece of Syria, its fatherland. End of footnote. Likewise, sheep are brought hither and sold, so that as to Mecca itself, it affords little or nothing of comfortable provisions. It lieth in a very hot country, insomuch that people run from one side of the streets to the other to get into the shadows, as the motion of the sun causes it. The inhabitants, especially men, do usually sleep on the tops of the houses for the air, or in the streets before their doors. Some lay in the small bedding that have on a thin mat on the ground. Others have a slight frame, made much like drink stalls, on which we place barrels, standing on 4 legs corded with palm cordage, on which they put their bedding. Before they bring out their bedding, they sweep the streets and water them. As for my own part, I usually lay open without any bed covering on the top of the house. Only I took a linen cloth, dipped in water, and after I had wrung it, covered myself with it in the night. And when I awoke, I should find it dry. Then I would wet it again, and thus I did 2 or 3 times in a night. Secondly, I shall next give you some account of the temple of Mecca. It hath about 40 doors to enter into it, not so much, I think, for necessity as figure. In some places they are close by one another. The form of it is much resembling that of the Royal Exchange in London, but I believe it is near 10 times bigger. It is all open and gravelled in the midst, except some paths that come from certain doors which lead to the Bayt Allah, and are paved with broad stones. The walks or cloisters all round are arched overhead, and paved beneath with fine broad stone, and all round are little rooms or cells, where which dwell and give themselves up for reading, studying, and a devout life, who are much akin to their dervises or hermits. The Bayt Allah, which stands in the middle of the temple, is 4 square, about 24 paces each square, and near 24 foot in height. Footnote. This is an error of printing for paces. End of footnote. It is built with great stone, all smooth and plain, without the least bit of carved work on it. It is covered all over, from top to bottom, with a thick sort of silk. Above the middle part of the covering are embroidered all round letters of gold, the meaning of which I cannot well call to mind, but I think there were some devout expressions. Each letter is near 2 foot in length and 2 inches broad. Near the lower end of this bead are large brass rings fastened into it, through which passeth a great cotton rope, and to this the lower end of the covering is tacked. The threshold of the door that belongs to the beat is as high as a man can reach, and therefore, when any person enter into it, a sort of ladder stairs are brought for that purpose. The door is plated all over with silver. Footnote. Pitsnote. Not a massy gold, as late French author, who I am sure was never there, says. The door is of wood, only plated over with silver. Much less is the inside of the beat, sealed with massy gold, as the same Frenchman asserts. I can assure the world there is no such thing. The door is of wood, thickly plated over with silver, in many parts gilt, and whatever hereabouts is gilt, the Meccans always call gold, RFB. End of footnote. And there is a covering, hangs over it, and reaches to the ground, which is kept turned up all the week, except Thursday night and Friday, which is their Sabbath. The said covering of the door is very thick, embroidered with gold, insomuch that it weighs several score pounds. The top of the beat is flat, beaten with lime and sand, and there is a long gutter or spout to carry off the water when it rains, at which time the people will run, throng, and struggle to get under the said gutter, so that the water that comes off the beat may fall upon them, accounting it as the dew of heaven, and looking on it as a great happiness to have it drop upon them. But if they can recover some of this water to drink, they esteem it to be yet a much greater happiness. Many poor people make it their endeavour to get some of it, and present it to the Hagges, for which they are well rewarded. My patroon had a present made him of this water, with which he was not a little pleased, and gave him that brought it a good reward. This Beat Allah is open but 2 days in the space of 6 weeks, viz. 1 day for the men, and the next day for the women. Footnote: this is no longer the case. Few women ever enter the Kaaba, on account of the personal danger they run there. End of footnote. I was at Meccah about 4 months. I had the opportunity of entering into it twice, a reputed advantage which many thousands of Hajjis have not met with, for those that come by land make no longer stay at Meccah than 16 or 17 days. When any enter into the Beat, all that they have to do is perform 2 erkats on each side. Footnote: more correctly, at 3 of the corners, and the 4th opposite the southern third of the western wall. End of footnote. With the holding up their 2 hands and petitioning at the conclusion of each 2 erkats, and they are so very reverent and devout in doing this that they will not suffer their eyes to wander and gaze about, for they account it very sinful to do so. Nay, they say that one was smitten blind for gazing about when in the Beat, as the reward of his vain and unlawful curiosity. Footnote: it is deemed disrespectful to look at the ceiling, but pilgrims may turn their eyes in any other direction they please. End of footnote. I could not, for my part, give any credit for this story, but looked on it as a legendary relation, and therefore was resolved, if I could, to take my view of it. I mean not to continue gazing about it, but now and then to cast an observing eye. And I profess I found nothing worth seeing in it, only 2 wooden pillars in the midst to keep up the roof. Footnote: there are now 3. End of footnote. And a bar of iron fastened to them, on which hang 3 or 4 silver lamps, which are, I suppose, but seldom, if ever, lighted. In one corner of the Beat is an iron or brass chain. I cannot tell which, for I made no use of it. The pilgrims just clap it about their necks in token of repentance. The floor of the Beat is marble, and so is the inside of the walls, on which there is written something in Arabic, which I had no time to read. The walls, though of marble on the inside, are hung over with silk, which is pulled off before the Hagges enter. Footnote: it is tucked up about 6 feet high. End of footnote. Those that go into the Beat tarry there but a very little while, viz. scarce so much as half a quarter of an hour, because others wait for the same privilege, and while some go in, others are going out. After all is over, and all that will have done this, the Sultan of Meccah, who is Sharif, i.e. one of the race of the Mahomet, accounts himself not too good to cleanse the Beat, and therefore with some of his favourites doth wash and cleanse it. And first of all they wash it with the holy water Zemzem, and after that with sweet water. The stairs which were brought to enter in at the door of the Beat being removed, the people crowd under the door to receive on them the sweepings of the said water, and the besoms wherewith the Beat is cleansed are broken in pieces and thrown out amongst the mob, and he that gets a small stick or twig of it keeps it as a sacred relic. But to speak something further of the temple of Meccah, for I am willing to be very particular in matters about it, though in so being I should, it may be, speak of things which by some people may be thought trivial. The compass of the ground round the Beat, where the people exercise themselves in the duty of tawaf, is paved with marble about 50 foot in breadth. Footnote: it is a close kind of grey granite, which takes a high polish from the pilgrims' feet. End of footnote. And round this marble pavement stand pillars of brass about 15 foot high. Footnote: now iron posts. End of footnote. And 20 foot distant from each other, above the middle part of which iron bars are fastened, reaching from one to the other, and several lamps made of glass are hanged to each of the said bars, with brass wires in the form of a triangle, to give light in the night season, for they pay their devotions at the Beat Allah as much by night as by day, during the Hajj's stay at Meccah. These glasses are half filled with water, and a third part with oil, on which a round wire brass is buoyed up with 3 little corks. In the midst of this wire is made a place to put in the wick or cotton, which burns till the oil is spent, Every day they are washed clean and replenished with fresh water, oil, and cotton. On each of the 4 squares of the beat is a little room built, and over every one of them is a little chamber with windows all around it, in which chambers of the Imams, together with the Muezzins, perform Salah, in the audience of all the people which are below. These 4 chambers are built one at each square of the beat, by reason that there are 4 sorts of the Mahometans. The first called Hanafi, most of them are Turks; the second Shafi'i. The Shafi'i school have never had a peculiar oratory like the other 3 schools. They pray near the well Zamzam. Whose manners and ways the Arabians follow. The third Hanbali, of which there are but few. The fourth Maliki, of which there are those that lived westward of Egypt, even to the Emperor of Morocco's country. These all agree in fundamentals, only there is some small difference between them in the ceremonial part. About 12 paces from the beat is, as they say, the sepulchre of Abraham. This place contains the stone which served Abraham for a scaffold when he was erecting the Kaaba. Some of our popular writers confound this stone with the Hajar al-Aswad. Who, by God's immediate command, they tell you, built this Beat Allah, which sepulchre is enclosed within iron gates. It is made somewhat like the tombstone which people of fashion have among us, but with a very handsome embroidered covering. Into this persons are apt to gaze. A small distance from it, on the left hand, is a well, which they call Bir al-Zamzam. The water, therefore, they call holy water, and as superstitiously esteem it as the Papists do theirs. In the month of Ramadan they will be sure to break their fast with it. They report that it is as sweet as milk, but for my part I could perceive no other taste in it than in common water, except that it was somewhat brackish. The Hagis, when they come first to Meccah, drink of it unreasonably, by which means they are not much purged, but their flesh breaks out all in pimples, and this they call the purging of their spiritual corruptions. There are hundreds of pitchers belonging to the temple, which in the month of Ramadan are filled with the said water, and placed all along before the people with cups to drink, as they are kneeling and waiting for Aksham Namaz, or evening service. And as soon as the Muezzins, or clerks on the tops of the minarets, began their bawling to call them to the Namaz, they fall a drinking thereof before they begin their devotions. This Bir, or well of Zamzam, is in the midst of one of the little rooms before mentioned, at each square of the beat, distant about 12 or 14 paces from it, out of which 4 men are employed to draw water without any pay or reward for any that shall desire it. Each of these men have 2 leather buckets tied to a rope on a small wheel, one of which comes up full while the other goes down empty. They do not only drink this water, but oftentimes bathe themselves with it, at which time they take off their clothes, only covering their lower parts with thin wrapper, and one of the drawers pours on each person's head 5 or 6 buckets of water. The worthy Mons, the Venant, saith that the waters of Meccah are bitter, but I never found them so, but as sweet and as good as any others, for aught as I could perceive. Pitts has just remarked that he found the waters of Zamzam brackish. To my taste it was salt bitter, which was exceedingly disagreeable. RFB. The person bathing may lawfully wash himself therewith above the middle, but not his lower parts, because they account they are not worthy, only letting the water take its way downwards. In short, they make use of this water only to drink, take abdis, and for bathing. Neither may take abdis with it, unless they first cleanse their sacred parts with other common water. Yea, such a high esteem they have for it, that many Hajis carry it home to their respective countries in little latten or tin pots, and present it to their friends. Half a spoonful may be to each, who receive it in the hollow of their hand with great care and abundance of thanks, sipping a little of it, and bestowing the rest on their faces and naked heads, at the same time holding up their hands and desiring God that they also may be so happy and prosperous as to go on pilgrimage to Meccah. The reason of their putting such a high value upon the water of this well is because, as they say, it is the place where Ishmael was laid by his mother Hagar. I have heard them tell the story exactly as it is recorded on the 21st chapter of Genesis, and they say that in the very place where the child paddled with his feet the water flowed out. End of Appendix 5, Part 1. Appendix 5 of Personal Narrative of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Appendix 5 of Personal Narrative of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah by Richard Francis Burton. The Pilgrimage of Joseph Pitts to Mecca and Al-Madinah, AD 1680, Part 2. I shall now inform you how, when, and where they receive the honourable title of Hajis, for which they are at all this pains and expense. The Qurban Biram, or the Feast of Sacrifice, follows 2 months and 10 days after the Ramadan fast. The 8th day after the set 2 months, they all enter into Hirawim, i.e. put on their mortifying habit again, and in that manner go to a certain hill called Jabal Urfat, i.e. Arafat, Arafat, i.e. the Mountain of Knowledge, for there, they say, Adam first found and knew his wife Eve. And they likewise say that she was buried at Gidda near the Red Sea, at whose sepulchre all the Hajis who come to Mecca by way of the Red Sea perform to Erka its namaz, and I think no more. I could not help but smile to hear this their ridiculous tradition, for so I must pronounce it, when observing the marks which were set, the one at the head and the other at the foot of the grave. I guessed them to be a bow-shot distant from each other. On the middle of her supposed grave is a little mosque built, where the Hagis pay their religious respect. This Gibel, or hill, is not so big as to contain the vast multitudes which resort thither, for it is said by them that there meet no less than 70,000 souls every year in the 9th day after the 2 months after Ramadan. And if it happen that in any year there be wanting some of that number, God, they say, will supply the deficiency with so many angels. Footnote. They are not so modest. 600,000 is the mystical number. Others declare it to be incalculable. Oftentimes 7,000 have met at Arafat. End of footnote. I do confess the number of Hagis I saw at this mountain was very great. Nevertheless, I cannot think they could amount to so many as 70,000. There are certain bound stones placed round the Gibbel in the plain, to shew how far the sacred ground, as they esteem it, extends. And many are so zealous as to come and pitch their tents within these bounds, some time before the hour of paying their devotion here comes, waiting for it. But why they so solemnly approach this mountain beyond any other place, and receive from hence the title of Hajis, I confess I do not more fully understand than what I have already said, giving but little heed to these delusions. I observed nothing worth seeing on this hill, for there was only a small cupola on the top of it. Footnote. The cupola has now disappeared. There is a tall pillar of masonry work, whitewashed, rising from a plastered floor, for praying. End of footnote. Neither are there many inhabitants nearer to it than Mecca. About 1 or 2 of the clock, which is the time of Yola Namaz, having washed and made themselves ready for it, they perform that, and at the same time perform Akindo namaz, which they never do at the same time, but upon this occasion, because at the time when Akindo namaz should be performed in the accustomed order, viz. about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they are imploring pardon for their sins, and receiving the Imam's benediction. Footnote. On the 9th of Dhul Hijjah, or the day of Arafat, the pilgrims, having taken their stations within the sacred limits, perform ablution about noon, and pray as directed at that hour. At 3 p.m., after again performing the usual devotions, or more frequently after neglecting them, they repair to the hill, and hear the sermon. End of footnote. It was a sight indeed, able to pierce one's heart, to behold so many thousands in their garments of humility and mortification, with their naked heads and cheeks watered with tears, and to hear their grievous sighs and sobs, begging earnestly for the remission of their sins, promising newness of life, using a form of penitential expressions, and thus continuing for the space of 4 or 5 hours, viz. until the time of Aksham Namaz, which is to be performed about half an hour after sunset. It is a matter of sorrowful reflection to compare the indifference of many Christians with this zeal of these poor blind Mahometans, who will, it is said to be feared, rise up in judgment against them and condemn them. After their solemn performance of their devotions thus at the Jebel, they all at once receive that honourable title of Hajji from the Imam, and are so styled to their dying day. Immediately upon their receiving this name, the trumpet is sounded, and they all leave the hill and return for Meccah, and being gone 2 or 3 miles on their way, they then rest for the night. At Muzdalifah. But after namaz, before they go to rest, each person gathers 49 small stones about the bigness of a hazelnut, the meaning of which I shall acquaint you presently. The next morning they move to a place called Mina or Muna, the place, as they say, where Abraham went to offer up his son Isaac, and therefore in this place they sacrifice their sheep. This I scarcely need say, speaking as a Christian. All Muslims believe that Ishmael, not Isaac, was ordered to be sacrificed. The place to which Pitts alludes is still shown to pilgrims. It is about 2 or 3 miles from Mecca. I was here shown a stone, or a little rock, which was parted in the middle. They told me that when Abraham was going to sacrifice his son, instead of striking him, Providence directed his hand to this stone, which he clave in 2. It must be a good stroke indeed. Here they all pitch their tents, it being in a spacious plain, and spend the time of the Qurban Biram, viz. 3 days. As soon as their tents are pitched, and all things orderly disposed, every individual Haggi, the first day, goes and throws 7 of the small stones which they had gathered against a small pillar, or little square stone building. Monsieur de Thévenot saith that they throw these stones at the Gibbel or mount, but indeed it is otherwise, though I must needs say he is very exact in almost everything of Turkish matters, and I pay much deference to that great author. Which action of theirs is intended to testify their defiance of the devil and his deeds, for they are at the same time pronounce the following words: Erzumle Shaitane was behe. The Rami, or jaculator, now usually says, as he casts each stone, in the name of Allah, and Allah is omnipotent, Raghman lil-Shaytani wa khizyatih, in token of abhorrence to Satan, and for his ignominy I do this. I.e., stone the devil and them that please him. The Arabic would mean stone the devil and slay him, unless wasbihi be an error of washabih and his companions. And there are 2 other of the like pillars which are situated near one another, at each of which, I mean all 3, the 2nd day they throw 7 stones, and the same they do the 3rd day. As I was going to perform the ceremony of throwing stones, a facetious Haggi met me, saith, You may save your labour at present, if you please, for I have hit out the devil's eyes already. You must observe that after they have thrown the 7 stones on the 1st day, the country people having brought great flocks of sheep to be sold, every one buys a sheep and sacrifices it, some of which they give to their friends, some to the poor which come out of Mecca and the country adjacent, very ragged poor, and the rest they eat themselves. After which they shave their heads, throw off hirawim, and put on other clothes, and then salute one another with a kiss, saying, Biram Mubarak Ila, i.e., the feast be a blessing to you. These 3 days of Biram they spent festively, rejoicing with abundance of illuminations all night, shooting of guns and fireworks flying in the air, for they reckon that all their sins are now done away, and they shall, when they die, go directly to heaven, if they don't apostatize, and that for the future, if they keep their vow and do well, God will set down for every good action 10, but if they do ill, God will likewise reckon every evil action 10, and any person who, after having received the title of Haggi, shall fall back to a vicious course of life, is esteemed to be very vile and infamous by them. Even the present day men who have led wild lives in their youth often date their reformation from the first pilgrimage. Some have written that many of the Hajjis, after they have returned home, have been so austere to themselves as to pore a long time over red-hot bricks, of ingots of iron, and by that means willingly lose their sight, desiring to see nothing evil or profane after so sacred a site as the temple at Meccah. But I never knew any such thing done. During their 3 days' stay at Mina, scarce any Hajji, unless impotent, but thinks it is his duty to pay his visit at least once to the temple at Meccah. They scarce cease running all the way thitherward, shewing their vehement desire to have a fresh sight of the Beat Allah, which as soon as ever they come in sight, they burst into tears for joy, and after having performed tawaf for a while and a few erkats, they return again to Mina. And when the 3 days of Biram are expired, they all, with their tents, etc., come back again to Meccah. They say that after the Hajjis are gone from Mina to Meccah, God doth usually send a good shower of rain to wash away the filth and dung of the sacrifices there slain, and also that those vast numbers of little stones, which I told you the Hajjis throw in defiance of the devil, are all carried away by the angels before the year comes about again. But I am sure I saw vast numbers of them that were thrown the year before lie upon the ground. After they are returned to Meccah, they can tarry there no longer than the stated time, which is about 10 or 12 days, during which time there is a great fair held, where sold all manners of East India goods, and abundance of fine stones for rings and bracelets, etc., brought from the Yemen. Footnote: Al-Yemen, southern of Arabia, whose aqiq or cornelians were celebrated. End of footnote. Also chinaware and musk, and variety of other curiosities. Now is the time in which the Hajjis are busily employed in buying, for they do not think it lawful to buy anything till they have received the title of Hajji. Every one almost now buys a coffin, or a shroud of fine linen, to be buried in, for they never use coffins for that purpose, which might have been procured at Algiers or their other respective homes at a much cheaper rate. But they choose to buy it here because they have the advantage of dipping it in the holy water Zemzem. They are very careful to carry the said coffin with them wherever they travel, whether by sea or land, that they may be sure to be buried therein. The evening before they leave Meccah, every one must go to take their solemn leave of the Beat, entering at the gate called Bab al-Salam, i.e. the welcome gate, and having continued at tawaf as long as they please, which many do so till they are quite tired, and it being their last time paying their devotions to it, they do it with floods of tears, as being extremely unwilling to part and bid farewell, and having drank their fill of the water Zemzem, they go to one side of the Beat, their backs being toward the door called by the name Bab al-Widuh, i.e. the farewell door, which is opposite to the welcome door, where, having performed 2 or 3 erkats, they get upon their legs and hold up their hands towards the Beat, making earnest petitions, and then keep going backward till they come to the above said farewell gate, being guided by some other, for they account it a very irreverent thing to turn their backs towards the Beat when they have to take leave of it. All the way as they retreat they continue petitioning, holding up their hands with their eyes fixed upon the Beat, till they are out of sight of it, and so go to their lodgings weeping. Ere I leave Meccah, I shall acquaint you with the passage of a Turk to me in the temple cloister, in the night time between Aksham Namas and Giga Namas, i.e. between the evening and the night services. The Hajjis as usually spend that time, or a good part of it, which is about an hour and a half, at tawaf, and then sit down on the mats and rest themselves. This I did, and after I had sat a while, and for my more ease at last was lying on my back with my feet towards the Beat, but at a distance as many others did, a Turk which sat by me asked me what countryman I was. A Maghribi, I said, i.e. one of the West. Pray, quoth he, how far west did you come? I told him from Gazair, i.e. Algiers. Ah, he replied, have you taken so much pains and been at so much cost, and now be guilty of this irreverent posture before the Beat Allah? Here are many Moors who get beggarly livelihood by selling models of the temple unto strangers, and in being serviceable to the pilgrims. Here are also several Effendis or masters of learning, who daily expound out the Al-Quran, sitting in high chairs, and some of the learned pilgrims, whilst they are here to undertake the same. Under the room of the Hanafis, which I mentioned before, people do usually gather together between the hours of devotion, and sitting round cross-legged, it might be 20 or 30 of them. They They have a very large pair of tasbihs or beads, each bead near as big as a man's fist, which they keep passing round, bead after bead, one to the other, all the time, using some devout expressions. I myself was once got in amongst them, and methought it was pretty play enough for children. However, I was to appearance very devout. There are likewise some dervishes that get money here, as well as at other places, by burning of incense, swinging their censers as they go along before the people that are sitting, as this they do commonly on Friday, their Sabbath. In all other gameler or mosques, when the khatib is preaching, and the people all sitting still at their devotion, they are all in ranks, so that the dervishes, without the least disturbance to any, walks between every rank, with his censer in one hand, and with the other takes his powdered incense out of a little pouch that hangs by his side. This is still practiced in Moslem countries, being considered a decent way of begging during public prayers, without interrupting them. But though this place, Meccah, is esteemed so very holy, yet it comes short of none for lewdness and debauchery. As for uncleanliness, it is equal to Grand Cairo, and they will steal even in the temple itself. Chapter 8. Of the Pilgrims' return from Meccah, their visit made at Medina to Mahomet's tomb there. Having thus given you an account of the Turks' pilgrimage to Meccah, and of their worship there, the manner and circumstances of which I have faithfully and punctually related, and may challenge the world to convict me of known falsehood, I now come to take leave of the temple and town of Meccah. Having hired camels of the carriers, we set out, but we give as much for the hire of one from Meccah to Egypt, which is about 40 days' journey, as the real worth of it is about 5 or 6 pounds sterling. If it happen that the camel dies by the way, the carrier is to supply us with another, and therefore those carriers who come from Egypt to Meccah with a caravan, these people will contract to board the pilgrim, and to provide him with a tent, as well as to convey his luggage. Those carriers who come from Egypt to Meccah with a caravan bring with them several spare camels, for there is hardly a night passeth but many die upon the road. For if a camel should chance to fall, it is seldom known that it is able to rise again, and if it should, they despair of its being capable of performing the journey, or even being useful any more. It is a common thing, therefore, that when a camel falls, to take off its burden and to put it on another, and then kill it, which the poorer sort of the company eat. I myself have eaten a camel's flesh, and it was very sweet and nourishing. If a camel tires, they even leave him upon the place. The first day we set out from Meccah, it was without any order at all hurly-burly. But the next day every one laboured to get forward, and in order to it there was many time much quarrelling and fighting. But after every one had taken his place in the caravan, they orderly and peaceably kept the same place till they came to Grand Cairo. They travel 4 camels in abreast, which are all tied one after the other, like in teams. The whole body is called a caravan, which is divided into several qatars or companies, each of which hath its name, and consists, it may be, of several thousand camels, and they move one qatar after another, like distinct troops. The usual way now is in qitar, or the Indian file, each camel's halter being tied to the tail of the beast that precedes him. Pitt's qatar must be a qitar, but he uses the word in another of its numerous senses. In the head of each qatar is some great gentleman or officer, who is carried in a thing like a horse litter, borne by 2 camels, one before and the other behind, which is covered all over with cere cloth, and over that again with green broad cloth, and set forth very handsomely. If the said great person hath a wife with him, she is carried in another of the same. This vehicle is the Takhtrawan of Arabia. In the head of every qatar there goes likewise a sumpter camel, which carries his treasures, etc. This camel hath 2 bells, about the bigness of our market bells, having one on each side, the sound of which may be heard a great way off. Some other of the camels have round bells about their necks, some about their legs, like those which our carriers put about their 4 horses' necks, which, together with the servants who belong to the camels and travel on foot, singing all night, make a pleasant noise, and the journey passes away delightfully. They say this music makes the camels brisk and lively. Thus they travel in good order every day till they come to Grand Cairo, and were it not for this order, you may guess that confusion would be amongst such a vast multitude. They have lights by night, which is the chief time of travelling, because of the exceeding heat of the sun by day, which are carried on tops of high poles to direct Hajis on their marches. He describes the mashals still in use. Lane has sketched them. Maud Egypt chapter 6. They are somewhat like iron stoves, into which they put short dry wood, which some of the camels are loaded with. It is carried in great sacks, which have a hole near the bottom, where the servants take it out, as they see the fires need a recruit. Every cotter hath one of these poles belonging to it, some which have 10, some 12. Of these lights on their tops are more or less, and they are likewise of different figures as well as numbers. One perhaps oval way, like a gate; another triangular, or like an N or an M, etc., so that everyone knows by them his respective cutter. They are carried in the front, and set up in the place where the caravan is to pitch before that comes up, and at some distance from another. They are also carried by day, not lighted, but yet by the figure and the number of them. The Hajis are directed to what cutter they belong, as soldiers are by their colours, where to rendezvous, and without such direction it would be impossible to avoid confusion in such a vast number of people. Every day, viz. in the morning, they pitch their tents and rest several hours. When the camels are unloaded, the owners drive them to water, and give them their provender, etc., so that we had nothing to do with them beside helping to load them. As soon as our tents were pitched, my business was to make a little fire and get a pot of coffee. When we had ate some small matter and drank the coffee, we lay down to sleep. Between 11 and 12 we boiled something for dinner, and having dined, lay down again till about 4 in the afternoon, when the trumpet was sounded, which gave notice to everyone to take down their tents, pack up their things, and load their camels in order to proceed on their journey. It takes about 2 hours' time ere they are in all their places again. At the time Aksham Namaz and also Giga Namaz, they make halt and perform their salah, so punctual are they in their worship, and then they travel till next morning. If water be scarce, what I call imaginary abdes will do. Pitts means by imaginary abdes is the sand ablution, lawful when water is wanted for sustaining life. As for ancient men, it being very troublesome for such to alight off the camels and get up again, it is lawful for them to defer these 2 times of namaz till the next day, but they will be sure to perform it then. As for provision, we bring enough out of Egypt to suffice us till we return thither again. At Mecca we compute how much will serve us for 1 day, and consequently for the 40 days' journey to Egypt, and if we find we have more than we may well guess will suffice us for a long time, we sell the overplus at Mecca. There is charity maintained by the Grand Signore for water to refresh the poor who travel on foot all the way, for there are many such undertake this journey or pilgrimage without any money, relying on the charity of the Hagis for subsistence, knowing that they largely extend it at such time. Every Haji carries his provision, water, bedding, etc. with him, and usually 3 or 4 diet together, and sometimes discharge a poor man's expenses the whole journey for his attendance on them. There was an Irish renegade who was taken very young, insomuch that he had not only lost his Christian religion, but his native language also. This man had endured 30 years slavery in Spain and in the French galleys, but was afterwards redeemed and came home to Algiers. He was looked upon as a very pious man and a great zealot, but the Turks, for his not turning from the Mohammedan faith, notwithstanding the great temptations he had to do so. Some of my neighbours who intended for Mecca the same year I went with my patroon thither, offered this renegado that if he would serve them on this journey, they would defray his charges throughout. He gladly embraced the offer, and I remember when we arrived at Mecca, he passionately told me that God had delivered him out of hell upon earth, meaning his former slavery in France and Spain, and had brought him into a heaven upon earth, viz. Mecca. I admired much of his zeal, but pitied his condition. Their water they carry in goatskin, which they fasten to one side of their camels. It sometimes happens that no water is to be met with for 2, 3, or more days, yet it is well known that a camel is the creature that can live long without drinking, God in his wise providence so ordering it, for otherwise it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to travel throughout the parched deserts of Arabia. In this journey many times the skulking, thievish Arabs do much mischief to some of the Hajis. For the night they will steal upon them, especially such are the ones outside the caravan, and being taken to be some of the servants that belong to the carriers or owners of the camels, they are not suspected. When they see a Haji fast asleep, for it is usual for them to sleep on the road, they loose a camel before and behind, and one of the thieves lead it away with the Haji upon its back asleep. Another of them, in the meanwhile, pulls on the next camel to tie it to the camel from whence the halter of the other was cut, for if that camel be not fastened again to the leading camel, it will stop, and all that are behind will then stop the course, which might be the means of discovering the robbers. When they have gotten the stolen camel, with its rider, at a convenient distance from the caravan, and think themselves out of danger, they awake the Haji, and sometimes destroy him immediately, but at other times, being a little more inclined to mercy, they strip him naked and let him return to the caravan. Footnote. As I shall explain at a future time, there are still some Hijazi Bedouin whose young men, before entering life, risk everything in order to plunder a Haji. They care little for the value of the article stolen, the exploit consists in stealing it. End of footnote. About the 10th easy day's journey, we come out of Mecca. We enter into Medina, the place where Mahomet lies entombed. Although it be, as I take it, 2 or 3 days' journey out of the direct way from Mecca to Egypt, yet the Hajis pay their visits there for the space of 2 days, and come away the 3rd. Those Mahometans which live to the southward of Mecca, at the East Indies and thereaway, are not bound to make visit to Medina, but to Mecca only, because it would be so much out of their way. But such as come from Turkey, Tartary, Egypt, and Africa, think themselves obliged to do so. Medina is but a little town, and poor, yet it is walled round. Footnote. The walls therefore were built between AD 1503 and AD 1680. End of footnote. And hath in it a great mosque, but nothing near so big as the temple at Mecca. In one corner of the mosque is a place built about 14 or 15 paces square. About this place are great windows. Footnote. These are not windows, but simply the intercolumnar spaces filled with grating. End of footnote. Fenced with brass gates. In the inside it is checked with some lamps and ornaments. It is arched all overhead. I find some relate that there are also no less than 3000 lamps about Mahomet's tomb, but it is a mistake, for there are not, as I verily believed, 100, and I speak what I know and have been an eye witness of. In the middle of this place is the tomb of Mahomet, where the corpse of that bloody impostor is laid, which hath silk curtains all around it like a bed, which curtains are not costly nor beautiful. There is nothing of his tomb to be seen by any, by reason of the curtains around it, nor are any of the Hajis permitted to enter there. Footnote. This account is perfectly correct. The eunuchs, however, do not go into the tomb, they only light the lamps in and sweep the passage round the sepulchre. End of footnote. None go in but the eunuchs, who keep watch over it, and they only light the lamps which burn there by night, and to sweep and cleanse the place. All the privilege the Haji have is only to thrust their hands at the windows, between the brass grates. Footnote. These are the small apertures in the southern grating. See chapter 16. End of footnote. And to petition the dead juggler, which they do with a wonderful deal of reverence, affection, and zeal. My patroon had his silk handkerchief stolen out of his bosom, while he stood at his devotion here. It is storied by some that the coffin of Mahomet hangs up by the attractive virtue of a lodestone to the roof of the mosque. But believe me, it is a false story. When I looked through the brass gate, I saw as much as any of the Hajis, and the top of the curtains which covered the tomb were not half so high as the roof or arch, so that it is impossible that his coffin should be hanging there. I never heard the Mahometans say anything like it. On the outside of this place, where Mahomet's tomb is, are some sepulchres of their reputed saints, among which one is prepared for Jesus Christ, when he shall come again personally into the world. For they hold that Christ will come again in the flesh 40 years before the end of the world, to confirm the Mahometan faith, and say likewise that our Saviour was not crucified in person but in effigy, or one like him. Medina is much supplied by the opposite Abyssine country, which is on the other side of the Red Sea. From thence they have corn and necessaries brought in ships, an odd sort of vessels I ever saw, their sails being made of matting, such as they use in the houses and mosques to tread upon. When we had taken our leave of Medina the third day, and travelled about 10 days more, we were met by a great many Arabians, who brought abundance of fruit to us, particularly raisins, but from whence I cannot tell. Footnote: the caravan must have been near the harbour of Muayla, where supplies are abundant. End of footnote. When we came within 15 days' journey of Grand Cairo, we were met by many people who came from thence, with their camels laden with presents for the Hajis, sent from their friends and relations as sweetmeats, etc. But some of them came rather for profit, to sell fresh provisions to the Hajis and trade with them. About 10 days before we got to Cairo, we came to a very long steep hill called Aqaba, which the Hajis are usually much afraid how they shall be able to get up. Those who can will walk it. The poor camels, having no hoofs, find it very hard to work, and may drop here. They are all untied, and we dealt gently with them, moving very slowly, and often halting. Before we came to this hill I observed no descent, and when we were at the top there was none, but all plain as before. We passed by Mount Sinai by night, and perhaps when I was asleep, so that I had no prospect of it. When we came within 7 days' journey of Cairo, we were met by abundance of people more, some hundreds who came to welcome their friends and relations. But it being night, it was difficult to find those they wanted, and therefore, as the caravans passed along, they kept calling them aloud by their names, and by this means found them out. When we were in 3 days' journey of it, we had many camel loads of the water of the Nile brought us to drink. By the day and night before we came to Cairo, thousands came out to meet us with extraordinary rejoicing. It is 37 days' journey from Mecca to Cairo, and 3 days we tarry by the way, which together makes us, as I said, 40 days' journey. And all this way there is scarce any green thing to be met with, nor beast nor fowl to be seen or heard, nothing but sand and stones, excepting one place which we passed through by night. I suppose it was a village, where were some trees, and we thought gardens. End of Appendix 5.
Chapter 50 of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Mecca. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater. Chapter 50 of Personal Narrative of a Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Mecca by Richard Francis Burton. Appendix 6. Giovanni Finati. The third pilgrim on our list is Giovanni Finati, who, under the Muslim name of Haji Muhammad, made the campaign against the Wahhabis for the recovery of Mecca and Al-Madinah. A native of Ferrara, the eldest of the 4 scions of a large landed proprietor, tenderly attached to his mother, and brought up most unwillingly for a holy vocation, to use his own words, instructed in all that course of frivolous and empty ceremonials and mysteries which form a principal feature in the training of a priest for the Romish Church. In A.D. 1805, Giovanni Finati's name appeared in the list of Italian conscripts. After a few vain struggles with fate, he was marched to Milan, drilled and trained. The next year his division was ordered to the Tyrol, where the young man, brought up for the church, instantly deserted. Discovered in his native town, he was sent under circumstances of suitable indignity to join his regiment at Venice, where a general act of grace, promulgated on occasion of Napoleon's short visit, preserved him from a platoon of infantry. His next move was to Spalato in Dalmatia, under General Marmont to Cattaro, the last retreat of the hardy and warlike Montenegrins.
At Budoa, a sea point southeast of Ragusa, having consulted an Albanian captain merchant, Giovanni Finati, and 15 other Italians, including the sergeant's wife, swore fidelity to one another, and deserted with all their arms and accoutrements. They passed into the Albanese territory, and were hospitably treated as soldiers who had deserted from the infidel army in Dalmatia by the Pasha, posted at Antivari to keep check upon the French operations. At first they were lodged in the mosque, and the sergeant's wife had been set apart from the rest, but as they refused to apostatize, they were made common slaves, and worked at the quarries till their backs were sore. Under these circumstances, the sergeant discovering and promulgating his discovery that the Mahometans believe as we do in a God, and upon examination that we might find the differences from our mother church to be less than we had imagined. All at once came the determination of professing to be Mohammedans. Our Italian Candide took the name of Mahomet, and became a pipe-bearer to a Turkish general officer in the garrison. This young man trusted the deserter to such an extent that the doors of the harem were opened to him, and Giovanni Finati repaid his kindness by seducing Fatima, a Georgian girl, his master's favourite wife. Note: he describes the harem as containing the females of different countries, all of them young, and all more or less attractive, and the merriest creatures I ever saw. His narration proves that affection and fidelity were not wanting there. The garrison then removed to Scutari. Being of course hated by his fellow servants, the renegade at last fell into disgrace, and exchanging the pipe stick for the hatchet, he became a hewer of wood. This degradation did not diminish poor Fatima's affection. She continued to visit him, and to leave little presents and tokens for him in his room. But presently the girl proved likely to be a mother. Their intercourse was more than suspected. Giovanni Finati had a dread of circumcision. Note: Mr. Banks, Finati's employer and translator, here comments upon Ali Bey's assertion: even to travellers in Mohammedan countries, I look upon the safety of their journey as almost impossible, unless they have previously submitted to the rite. Ali Bey is correct. The danger is doubled by non-compliance with the custom. Mr. Banks apprehends that very few renegados do submit to it. In bigoted Muslim countries it is considered a sine qua non. So he came to the felon resolution of flying alone from Scutari. He happened to meet his original friend, the captain merchant, and in March 1809 obtained from him a passage to Egypt, the El Dorado to which all poverty-struck Albanian adventurers were then flocking. At Alexandria, the new Mahomet, after twice deserting from a Christian service, at the risk of life and honour, voluntarily enlisted as an Albanian private soldier in a Muslim land. The naivete with which he admires and comments upon his conduct is a curious moral phenomenon. Thence he proceeded to Cairo, and became a Balikbash corporal in charge of 6 Albanian privates of Muhammad Ali's bodyguard. Ensued a campaign against the Mamluks in Upper Egypt, and his being present at the massacre of those miscreants in the citadel of Cairo, he confined his part in the affair to plundering from the beys a saddle richly mounted in silver gilt, and a slave girl with trinkets and money. He married the captive, and was stationed for 6 months at Mataria, Heliopolis, with the force preparing to march upon Mecca under Tusun Pasha. Here he suffered from thieves, and shot by mistake his bimbashi or sergeant, who was engaged in the unwanted and dangerous exercise of prayer in the dark. The affair was compromised by the amiable young commander-in-chief, who paid the blood money amounting to some 1,000 piastres. On the 6th October 1811 the army started for Suez, where 18 vessels waited to convey them to Yanbu. Mohammed assisted at the capture of that port, and was fortunate enough to escape alive from the desperate action of Jedaidah. Note, see chapter 13 of this work, end note. Rheumatism obliged him to return to Cairo, where he began by divorcing his wife for great levity of conduct. In the early part of 1814, Mohammed, inspired by the news of Muhammad Ali Pasha's success in Al-Hijaz, joined a reinforcement of Albanians, travelled to Suez, touched at Yambu and at Jeddah, assisted at the siege and capture of Kunfuda, and was present at its recapture by the Wahhabis. Wounded, sick, harassed by the Badawin, and disgusted by his commanding officer, he determined to desert again, adding as an excuse, not that the step, on my part at least, had the character of a complete desertion, since I intended to join the main body of the army, and to his mania for desertion we owe the following particulars concerning the city of Mecca. Exulting in my escape, my mind was in a state to receive very strong impressions. I was much struck with all I saw upon entering the city, for though it is neither large nor beautiful in itself, there is something in it that is calculated to impress a sort of awe, and it was the hour of noon, when everything is very silent, except the muezzins calling from the minarets. The principal feature of the city is that celebrated sacred enclosure which is placed about the centre of it. It is a vast paved court, with doorways opening into it from every side, and a covered colonnade carried all round like a cloister, while in the midst of the open space stands the edifice called the Kaaba, whose walls are entirely covered over on the outside with hangings of rich velvet. Note, black cloth according to Ali Bey, and I believe he is correct. So Mr. Banks. If Ali Bey meant broadcloth, both are in error, as the specimen in my possession, a mixture of silk and cotton, proves, on which there are Arabic inscriptions embroidered in gold. Facing one of its angles, for this little edifice is of a square form, note Ali Bey showed by his measurements that no two sides correspond exactly. To all appearance the sides are equal, though it is certain they are not. The height exceeds the length and the breadth. End note. There is a well which is called the well of Zemzem, of which the water is considered so peculiarly holy that some of it is even sent annually to the Sultan at Constantinople, and no person who comes to Mecca, whether on pilgrimage or for mere worldly considerations, ever fails both to drink of it and to use it in his ablutions, since it is supposed to wipe out the stain of all past transgressions. There is a stone also near the bottom of the building itself, which all the visitants kiss as they pass round it, and the multitude of them has been so prodigious as to have worn the surface quite away. Quite detached, but fronting to the Kaaba, stands 4 pavilions, corresponding to the 4 sects of the Mahometan religion, adapted for the pilgrims, and though the concourse had of late years been from time to time much interrupted, there arrived just when I came to Mecca 2 caravans of them, one Asiatic and one from the African side, amounting to no less than about 40,000 persons, who all seemed to be full of reverence towards the holy place. Note, Ali Bey, AD 1807, computes 80,000 men, 2,000 women, and 1,000 children at Arafat. Burckhardt, AD 1814, calculated it at 70,000. I do not think that in all there were more than 50,000 souls assembled together in 1853. After commenting on the crowded state of the city, the lodging of pilgrims in tents and huts, or on the bare ground outside the walls, note, rich pilgrims always secure lodgings, the poorer class cannot afford them, therefore the great caravans from Egypt, Damascus, Baghdad, and other places pitch on certain spots outside the city, end note. And the extravagant prices of provisions, Haji Mahomet proceeds with his description. Over and above the general ceremonies of the purification at the well, and of the kissing of the cornerstone, note, the stone is fixed in a massive gold or silver gilt circle to the southeast angle, but it is not part of the building, end note. And of the walking round the Kaaba a certain number of times in a devout manner, every one has also his own separate prayers to put up, and so to fulfill the conditions of his vow and the objects of his particular pilgrimage. We have then an account of the mosque pigeons, for whom it is said, some pilgrims bring with them, even from the most remote countries, a small quantity of grain, with which they may take the opportunity of feeding these birds. This may have occurred in times of scarcity. The grain is now sold in the mosque. The superstitions and ceremonies of the place, we are told, are by no means completed within the city, for the pilgrims, after having performed their devotions for a certain time at the Kaaba, at last, in a sort of procession, go to a place called Arafat, an eminence which stands detached in the centre of a valley, and in the way thither there is a part of the road for about the space of a mile where it is customary to run. Note, Ali Bey is correct in stating that the running is on the return from Arafat, directly after sunset. End note. The road also passes near a spot where was formerly a well, which is superstitiously supposed to be something unholy and cursed by the Prophet himself, and for this reason every pilgrim as he goes by it throws a stone, and the custom is so universal and has prevailed so long that none can be picked up in the neighbourhood, and it is necessary therefore to provide them from a distance, and some persons even bring them out of their own remote countries, thinking thereby to gain the greater favour in the sight of heaven. Note, this sentence abounds in blunders. Sale, Ali Bey, and Burckhardt all give correct accounts of the little pillar of masonry. It has nothing to do with the well, which denotes the place where Satan appeared to Abraham. The pilgrims do not throw one stone, but many. The pebbles are partly brought from Muzdalifah, partly from the valley of Munah, in which stands the pillar. End note. Beyond this point stands a column. Note, Mr. Banks confounds this column with the Devil's Pillar at Munah. Finati alludes to the landmarks of the Arafat plain, now called Al-Alamain, the two marks. The pilgrims must stand within these boundaries on a certain day, the 9th of Zul-Hijjah. Otherwise he has failed to observe a ritual ordinance. End note. Which is set up as the extreme limit of the pilgrimage, and this every pilgrim must have passed before sunrise, while all such as have gone beyond it by that time must wait till the next year, if they wish to be entitled to the consideration and privileges of complete Hajis, since without this circumstance all the rest remains imperfect. The hill of Arafat lies at a distance of 7 hours from Mecca. It is necessary to set out very early in order to be there in time, many of the pilgrims, and especially the more devout amongst them, performing all the way on foot. When they have reached the place, note, he appears to confound the proper place with Arafat, the sacrifice is performed in the valley of Munah after leaving the mountain, but Finati, we are told by his translator, wrote from memory, a pernicious practice for a traveller. End note. All who have any money according to their means sacrifice a sheep, and the rich often furnish those who are poor and destitute with the means of buying one. Such a quantity of sacrifices quite fills the whole open space with victims, and the poor flock from all the country round to have meat distributed to them, after which, at the conclusion of the whole ceremony, all the names are registered by a scribe appointed for the purpose. Note. This custom is now obsolete as regards the grand body of pilgrims. Anciently, a certificate from the Sharif was given to all who could afford money for a proof of having performed the pilgrimage, but no such practice at present exists. My friends have frequently asked me what proof there is of a Muslim's having become a Haji. None whatever. Consequently, impostors abound. Sa'di in the Golestan notices a case. But the ceremonies of the Hajj are so complicated and unintelligible by mere description that a little cross-questioning applied to the false Haji would easily detect him. And when this is finished, the African and Asiatic caravans part company and return to their own several countries, many detachments of the pilgrims visiting Medina in the way. Being desirous of enrolment in some new division of Muhammad Ali's army, Finati overcame the difficulty of personal access to him by getting a memorial written in Turkish and standing at the window of a house joined onto the enclosure of the great temple. After the 6th day, the Pasha observed him, and in the greatest rage imaginable desired a detailed account of the defeat at Kunfuda. Finati then received 500 piastres and an order to join a corps at Taif, together with a strict charge of secrecy, since it was of importance that no reverse or check should be generally talked of. Before starting, our author adds some singular particulars which escaped him in his account of Mecca. Many of the pilgrims go through the ceremony of walking the entire circuit of the city upon the outside, and the order in which this is performed is as follows. The devoted first goes without the gates, and after presenting himself there to the religious officer who presides, throws off all his clothes and takes a sort of large wrapping garment in lieu of them to cover himself, upon which he sets off walking at a very quick pace, or rather running, to reach the nearest of the 4 corners of the city, a sort of guide going with him at the same rate all the way, who prompts certain ejaculations or prayers, which he ought to mention at particular spots as he passes. At every angle he finds a barber, who with wonderful quickness wets and shaves 1/4 of his head, and so on, till he has reached the barber at the 4th angle, who completes the work. After which the pilgrim takes his clothes again, and has finished that act of devotion. Note: no wonder Mr. Banks is somewhat puzzled by this passage. Certainly none but a pilgrim could guess that the author refers to the rites called Al-Umrah and As-Say, or the running between Mount Safa and Marwa. The curious reader may compare the above with Burckhardt's correct description of the ceremonies. As regards the shaving, Finati possibly was right in his day. In Ali Bey's, as in my time, the head was only shaved once, and a few strokes of the razor sufficed for the purpose of religious tonsure. End note. There is also near the Holy City an eminence called the Hill of Light. Note Jabal Nur, anciently Hira, in a dull grey as of granite. It derives its modern name from the spiritual light of religion. Circumstances prevented my ascending it, so I cannot comment upon Finati's custom of leaping. End note. As I imagine from its remarkable whiteness. Upon this the pilgrims have a custom of leaping, while they repeat at the same time prayers and verses of the Crln. Many also resort to a lesser hill about a mile distant from the city, on which there is a small mosque, which is reputed as a place of great sanctity. An annual ceremony takes place in the great temple itself, which is worth mentioning before I quit the subject altogether. I have already spoken of the little square building whose walls are covered with hangings of black and gold, and which is called the Kaaba. Once in the year, note, open 3 days in the year according to Ali Bey, the same in Burckhardt's and in my time. Besides these public occasions, private largesses can always turn the key. End note. And once only this Holy of Holies is opened, and as there is nothing to prevent admission, it appears surprising at first to see so few who are willing to go into the interior, and especially since this act is supposed to have great efficacy in the remission of all past sins. But the reason must be sought for in the conditions which are annexed, since he who enters is, in the first place, bound to exercise no gainful pursuit, or trade, or to work for his livelihood in any way whatever, and next he must submit patiently to all offences and injuries, and must never again touch anything that is impure or unholy. Note, I heard from good authority that the Kaaba is never opened without several pilgrims being crushed to death. Ali Bey, remarks Mr. Banks, says nothing of the supposed conditions annexed. In my next volume, Part 3, Mecca, of this work, I shall give them, as I received them from the lips of learned and respectable Muslims. They differ considerably from Finati's, and no wonder. his account is completely opposed to the strong good sense which pervades the customs of al-Islam. As regards his sneer at the monastic orders in Italy, that the conditions of entering are stricter and more binding than those of the Kaaba, yet that numbers are ready to profess in them, it must not be imagined that Arab human nature differs very materially from Italian. Many unworthy feet pass the threshold of the Kaaba, but there are many Muslims, my friend Omar Effendi for instance, who have performed the pilgrimage a dozen times, and would never, from conscientious motives, enter the holy edifice. Endnote. One more remark with reference to the great scene of sacrifice at Arafat. Though the Pasha's power in Arabia had been now for some time established, yet it was not complete or universal by any means, the Wahhabis still retaining upon many sides a very considerable footing, so that open and unprotected places, even within half a day's journey of Mecca, might be liable to surprise and violence. For this reason, our author informs us, a sufficient force was disposed round Arafat, and the prodigious multitude went and returned without molestation or insult. Note, in 1807, according to Ali Bey, the Wahhabis took the same precaution, says Mr. Banks. The fact is, some such precautions must always be taken. The pilgrims are forbidden to quarrel, to fight, or to destroy life, except under circumstances duly provided for. Moreover, as I shall explain in another part of this work, it was of old, and still is, the custom of the fiercer kind of Badawin to flock to Arafat, where the victim is sure to be found, for the purpose of revenging their blood losses. As our authorities at Aden well know, there cannot be a congregation of different Arab tribes without a little murder. After fighting with the common foe, or if unable to fight with him, the wild men invariably turn their swords against their private enemies. Endnote. After the pilgrimage, Haji Muhammad repaired to Taif. On the road he remarked a phenomenon observable in Al-Hijaz, the lightness of the nights there. Finati attributes it to the southern position of the place. But observing a perceptible twilight there, I was forced to seek further cause. May not the absence of vegetation, and the heat-absorbing nature of the soil, granite, quartz, and basalt, account for the phenomenon? Note, so on the wild and tree-clad heights of the Nailguri hills, despite the brilliance of the stars, every traveller remarks the darkness of the atmosphere at night. The natives, as usual observing it, have invested its origin with the garb of fable. It is not my intention to accompany Muhammad to the shameful defeat at Taraba, where Tusun Pasha lost 3/4 of his army, or to the glorious victory of Bissel, where Muhammad Ali, on the 10th of January 1815, broke 24,000 Wahhabis, commanded by Faisal bin Saud. His account of this interesting campaign is not full or accurate like Mengin's. Still, being the tale of an eyewitness, it attracts attention. Nothing can be more graphic than his picture of the old conqueror sitting with exulting countenance upon the carpet where he had vowed to await death or victory, and surrounded by heaps of enemies' heads. Note, Muhammad Ali gave $6 for every Arab head, which fact accounts for the heaps that surrounded him. One would suppose that when acting against an enemy so quick and agile as the Arabs, such an order would be an unwise one. Experience, however, proves the contrary. Endnote. Still less would it be to the purpose to describe the latter details of Haji Muhammad's career, his return to Cairo, his accompanying Mr. Banks to Upper Egypt and Syria, and his various trips to Aleppo, Kurdistan, the Said, the Great Oasis, Nabathia, Sennaar, and Dongola. We concede to him the praise claimed by his translator, that he was a traveller to no ordinary extent, but beyond this we cannot go. He was so ignorant that he had forgotten to write. Note, Finati's long disuse of European writing, says Mr. Banks, made him very slow with his pen. Fortunately, he found in London some person who took down the story in easy, unaffected, and not inelegant Italian. In 1828, Mr. Banks translated it into English, securing accuracy by consulting the author when necessary. Endnote. his curiosity and his powers of observation keep pace with his knowledge. Note, his translator and editor is obliged to explain that he means Kufic by characters that are not now in use, and the statue of Memnon by one or two enormous sitting figures in the plain, from which, according to an old story or superstition, a sound proceeds when the sun rises. When the crew of his Nile boat form in circle upon the bank, and perform a sort of religious mummery, shaking their heads and shoulders violently, and uttering a hoarse sobbing or barking noise, till some of them would drop or fall into convulsions, a sight likely to excite the curiosity of most men, he takes his gun in pursuit of wild geese. He allowed Mr. Banks' mare to eat oleander leaves, and thus to die of the commonest poison. Briefly, he seems to have been a man who, under favourable circumstances, learned as little as possible. End note. His moral character, as it appears in print, is of that description which knows no sense of shame. It is not candour, but sheer insensibility, which makes him relate circumstantially his repeated desertions, his betrayal of Fatima, and his various plunderings. End of section 50. Recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater. Recorded in London, England. Chapter 51 of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater. Chapter 51 of Personal Narrative of a Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah by Richard Francis Burton. Appendix 7. Notes on My Journey by A. Sprenger. In the map to a former edition of the pilgrimage, Captain Burton's route from Medina to Mecca is wrongly laid out, owing to a typographical error of the text, from Wadi Laymun to Mecca southeast 45 degrees, see volume 2, page 155 ante, whereas the road runs southwest 45 degrees, or as Hamdani expresses himself in the commentary on the Qasida Rod, between west and south, and therefore the setting sun shines at the evening prayer, your face being turned towards Mecca on your right temple. The account of the eastern route from Medina to Mecca by so experienced a traveller as Captain Burton is an important contribution to our geographical knowledge of Arabia. It leads over the lower terrace of Najd, the country which Muslim writers consider as the home of the genuine Arabs and the scene of Arabic chivalry. As by this mistake the results of my friend's pilgrimage, which, though pious as he unquestionably is, he did not undertake from purely religious motives, have been in a great measure marred, I called in 1871 his attention to it. At the same time I submitted to him a sketch of a map in which his own and Burckhardt's routes are protracted, and a few notes culled from Arabic geographers, with the intention of showing how much light his investigations throw on early geography if illustrated by a corrected map, and how they fail to fulfil the object if the mistake is not cleared up. The enterprising traveller approved of both the notes and the map, and expressed it as his opinion that it might be useful to append them to the new edition. I therefore thought proper to recast them, and to present them herewith to the reader. At Sufayna, Burton found the Baghdad caravan, the regular Baghdad-Mecca road, of which we have two itineraries, the one reproduced by Hamdani, and the other by Ibn Khordadbeh Qudama, and others, leads to the left of Sufayna, and runs parallel with the eastern Medina-Mecca road to within one stage of Mecca. We find only one passage in Arabic geographers from which we learn that the Baghdadlis, as long as 1,000 years ago, used under certain circumstances to take the way of Sufayna. Yakut, volume 3, page 403 says, Sufayna, a place in the Alia highland within the territory of the Sulamites, lies on the road of Zubaydah. The pilgrims make a roundabout and take this road if they suffer from want of water. The pass of Sufaina, by which they have to descend, is very difficult. The ridges over which the road leads are called as-Siter, and are described by Yaqut, volume 3, page 38, as a range of red hills flanking Sufaina, with defiles which serve as passes. BURTON, volume 2, page 128, describes them as low hills of red sandstone and bright porphyry. Zobaida, whose name the partly improved, partly newly opened Hajj road from Baghdad to Mecca bore, was the wife of Caliph Harun, and it appears from BURTON, pages 134 and 136, that the improvements made by this spirited woman, as the wells near Qadir and the Birkat tank, are now ascribed to her weak, fantastical, and contemptible husband. BURTON's description of the plain, covered with huge boulders and detached rocks, page 131, puts us in mind of the Felsenmeer of the Odenwald. Yaqut, volume 3, page 370, describes the two most gigantic of these rock pillars, which are too far to the left of BURTON's road than that he could have seen them. Below Sufaina, in a desert plain, there rise two pillars so high that nobody, unless he be a bird, can mount them. The one is called Amud, column of Alban, and the place Alban, and the other Amud of Asaf. They are both on the right-hand side of the regular road from Baghdad to Mecca, 1 mile from Ofay'iyah, a station on the regular road which answers to Sufaina. Such desolate, fantastic scenery is not rare in Arabia, nor close to the western coast of the Red Sea. The Fiumara, from which BURTON, page 138, emerges at 6 a.m. September 9th, was crossed by Burckhardt at Kholois, and is a more important feature of the country than the two travellers were aware of. There are only 5 or 6 wadis which break through the chain of mountains that runs parallel with the Red Sea, and at these, proceeding from south to north, Wadi Nakhla, Wadi Laymun in the first, and this Fiumara the second. Early geographers call it Wadi Emej, or after a place of some importance situated in its lower course, Wadi Saya. Hamdani, page 294, says, Emej and Ghuran are the two wadis which commence in the Harra, volcanic region of the Beni Sulaim, and reach the sea. The descriptions of this wadi, compiled by Yaqut, volume 3, pages 26 and 839, are more ample. According to one, it contains 70 springs. According to another, it is a wadi which you overlook if you stand on the Shirat, the mountain now called Jabal Sobh. In its upper course it runs between the two Hamia, which is the name of two black volcanic regions. It contains several villages of note, and there lead roads to it from various parts of the country. In its uppermost part lies the village of Faria, with date groves, cultivated fields, and gardens, producing plantains, pomegranates, and grapes, and in its lower course, close to Saya, the rich and populous village of Mahaya. The whole wadi is one of the A'rad, oasis-like district of Medina, and is administered by a lieutenant of the governor of that city. Yaqut makes the remark to this description, I do not know whether this valley is still in the same condition, or whether it has altered. Though we know much less of it than Yaqut, we may safely assert that the cultivation has vanished and the condition has altered. At Zariba, Toribe, BURTON and his party put on the ihram, pilgrim garb. If the Baghdadlis follow the regular road, they perform this ceremony at Dzot Irq, which lies somewhat lower down than Toribe, to the southeast of it, and therefore the rainwater which falls in Toribe flows in the shape of a torrent to Dzot Irq, and is thence carried off by the northern Nakhla. Above the station of Dzot Irq, there rises ridges called Irq. Up these ridges the regular Baghdad road ascends to the high plateau, and they are therefore considered by early geographers as the western limit of Najd. Omera, Apud Yakut, Volume 4, page 746, says, all the country in which the water flows in an easterly, northeasterly direction, beginning from Zat Irq as far as Babylonia, is called Najd, and the country which slopes westwards from Zat Irq to Tehama, the coast, is called Hejaz. The remarks of Arabic geographers on the western watershed and those of Burton Volume 2, pages 142 and 154, illustrate and complete each other most satisfactorily. It appears from Yakut that Fiumara, in which Burton's party was attacked by robbers, takes its rise at Ghomayr, close to Zat Irq, that there were numerous date groves in it, and that it falls at Bustan ibn Amir into the Nakhla, wherefore it is called the northern Nakhla. The southern Nakhla, also called simply Nakhla, a term which is sometimes reserved for the trunk formed by the junction of the southern and northern Nakhla from Bustan ibn Amir downwards, is on account of its history one of the most interesting spots in all Arabia. I therefore make no apology for entering on its geography. In our days it is called Wadi Laymun, and Burckhardt, Volume 1, page 158, says of it, Zaymet is a half-ruined castle at the eastern extremity of Wadi Laymun, with copious springs of running water. Wadi Laymun is a fertile valley which extends for several hours towards west in the direction of Wadi Fatma, anciently called Butn Mar or Mar Zahran, which is in fact a continuation of Wadi Nakhla. It has many date plantations, and formerly the ground was cultivated, but this, I believe, has ceased since the Wahhabi invasion. Its fruit gardens, too, have been ruined. This, he means the village Laymun, compare Burton, Volume 2, page 147, is the last stage on the eastern Syrian Hajj route. To the southeast or east-southeast of Wadi Laymun is another fertile valley called Wadi Madik, where some sharifs are settled, and where Sharif Qalib possessed landed property. Note, Madik is Burton's El-Mazik, the spelling in Arabic being Madiq. Burckhardt's account leads us to think that the village now called Madiq, or Wadi Laymun, lies on the left bank of the Fiumara, and is identical with the Bustan ibn Amir, which is described by Yakut as situated in the fork between the northern and southern Nakhlas, and which in ancient times had, like the village of Wadi Laymun, the name of the valley of which it was the chief place, namely Batn Nakhla. Burton gives no information on the position of the village, but he says on the right bank of the Fiumara stood the Meccan Sharif's state pavilion. Unless the pavilion is separated from the village by the Fiumara, there is a discrepancy between the two accounts, which leads me to suspect that the right is an oversight for the left. Anciently, Nakhla was pronounced Nakhlet, and if we suppress the guttural, as the Greeks and Romans sometimes did, Nalat. Strabo, page 782, in his narrative of the retreat of Aelius Gallus, mentions a place which he calls Malotha, and of which he says it stood on the bank of a river, a position which few towns in Arabia have. The context leaves no doubt that he means Batn Nakhla, and that Malotha is a mistake for Nalotha. In the commentary on the Qasida Rod, Wadi Nakhla, as far as the road to Mecca runs through it, is described as follows. From the ridges with those whose declivity the western watershed begins, you descend into Wadi Bawbat. It is flanked on the left side by the Serat mountains, on which Taif stands, and contains Qarnul Manazil, once the capital of the Minayans, the great trading nation of antiquity. 3 or 4 miles below Qarn is Masjid Ibrahim, and here the valley assumes the name of Wadi Nakhla. At no great distance from the masjid there rise on the left-hand side of the wadi two high peaks called Jebel Yasum and Jebel Kafu. Both were the refuge of numerous monkeys who used to invade the neighbouring vineyards. As you go down Wadi Nakhla, the first place of importance you meet is Azayma. Close to it was a garden which, during the reign of Muqtadir, belonged to the Hashemite prince Abdullah, and was in a most flourishing condition. It produced an abundance of henna, plantains, and vegetables of every description, and yielded a revenue of 5,000 dinar mithqals, about £2,860 annually. A canal from Wadi, the river Nakhla, feeds a mountain which jets forth in the midst of the garden, and lower down a tank. In the garden stood a fort, which in a dilapidated condition is extant to this day, and spoken of by Burckhardt. It was built of huge stones, guarded for the defence of the property of the Banu Sa'd, and tenanted by the servants and followers of the proprietor. Below Azayma is Sabuha, a post station where a relay of horses was kept for the transport of government dispatches. To give an idea of the distances, I may mention that the post stages were 12 Arabic miles asunder, which on this road are rather larger than an English geographical mile. The first station from Mecca was Moshesh, the second Sabuha, and the third was at the foot of the hill Yasum. The author of the commentary from which I derive this information leaves Wadi Nakhla soon after Sabuha, and turns his steps towards the holy city. He mentions the steep rocky pass, up which Burton toiled with difficulty, and calls it Oraik. Though he enters into many details, he takes no notice of the hill-girt plain called Sola. This name occurs, however, in an Arabic verse, Apud Yaqut, volume 2, page 968. In summer our pasture grounds are in the country of Nakhla, within the districts of Azayma and Sola. In Wadi Fatima, Burckhardt found a perennial rivulet coming from the eastward about 3 feet broad and 2 feet deep. It is certain that Wadi Fatima, formerly called Wadi Maur, is a continuation of Wadi Nakhla, and Yaqut considers in one passage Nakhla as a subdivision of Mar, and in another Mar as a part of Wadi Nakhla. But we do not know whether the rivulet, which at Azayma seems to be of considerable size, disappears under the sand in order to come forth again in Wadi Maur, or whether it forms an uninterrupted stream. In ancient times the regular Baghdad-Mecca road did not run down from Zot Irq by the northern Nakhla, which Burton followed, but it crossed this wadi near its northern end and struck over to the southern Nakhla as far as Qarnul Marazil, which for a long time was the second station from Mecca instead of Zot Irq. End of section 51. Recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater. Recorded in London, England. Section 52 of Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater. Section 52 of Personal Narrative of a Pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah by Richard Francis Burton. Appendix 8. The Meccah Pilgrimage. Having resolved to perform the Meccah Pilgrimage, I spent a few months at Cairo, and on the 22nd of May embarked in a small steamer at Suez with the mahmil, or litter, and its military escort, conveying the kiswa, or covering for the Kaaba. On the 25th, the man at the wheel informed us that we were about to pass the village of Rabigh on the Arabian coast, and that the time had consequently arrived for changing our usual habiliments for the ihram, or pilgrim costume, of 2 towels, and for taking the various interdictory vows involved in its assumption, such as not to tie knots in any portion of our dress, not to oil the body, and not to cut our nails or hair, nor to improve the tints of the latter with the coppery red of henna. Transgression of these and other ceremonial enactments is expiated either by animal sacrifice or gifts of fruit or cereals to the poor. After a complete ablution, and assuming the ihram, we performed 2 prayer flexions, and recited the meritorious sentences, beginning with the words, Labbaik Allahumma labbaik. Here I am, O God, here I am. Here I am, O unassociated one, here I am. For unto thee belong praise, grace and empire, O unassociated one. The prayer was repeated so often, people not unfrequently rushing up to their friends and shrieking the sacred sentence into their ears, that at last it became a signal for merriment, rather than an indication of piety. On the 26th, we reached Jeddah, where the utter sterility of Arabia, with its dunes and rocky hills, becomes apparent. The town, however, viewed from the sea, is not unpicturesque. Many European vessels were at anchor off the coast, and as we entered the port, innumerable small fishing boats darting in all directions, their sails no longer white, but emerald green from the intense lustre of the water, crowded around us on all sides, and reminded one, by their dazzling colours and rapidity of motion, of the shoals of porpoises so often seen on a voyage round the Cape. On disembarking, we were accosted by several mutawwifs, or circuit men, so termed in Arabic, because, besides serving as religious guides in general, their special duty is to lead the pilgrim in his 7 obligatory circuits around the Kaaba. We encamped outside the town, and having visited the tomb of our mother Eve, mounted our camels for Mecca. After a journey of 20 hours across the desert, we passed the barriers which mark the outermost limits of the sacred city, and, ascending some giant steps, pitched our tents on a plain, or rather plateau, surrounded by barren rock, some of which, distant but a few yards, masked from view the birthplace of the Prophet. It was midnight. A few drops of rain were falling, and lightning played around us. Day after day we had watched its brightness from the sea, and many a faithful Haji had pointed out to his companions those fires which were heaven's witness to the sanctity of the spot. Alhamdulillah! Thanks be to God! We were now at length to gaze upon the Qibla, to which every Mussulman has turned in prayer since the days of Muhammad. Soon after dawn arose from our midst the shout of Labbaik, Labbaik, and passing between the rocks we found ourselves in the main street of Mecca, and approached the gateway of salvation, one of the 39 portals of the temple of Al-Haram. On crossing the threshold, we entered a vast unroofed quadrangle, a mighty amplification of the Palais Royal, having on each of its 4 sides a broad colonnade, divided into 3 aisles by a multitude of slender columns, and rising to the height of about 30 feet. Surmounting each arch of the colonnade is a small dome. In all there are 120, and at different points arise 7 minarets, dating from various epochs, and of somewhat varying altitudes and architecture. The numerous pigeons which have their home within the temple have been believed never to alight upon any portion of its roof, thus miraculously testifying to the holiness of the building. This marvel having, however, of late years been suspended, many discern another omen of the approach of the long predicted period when unbelievers shall desecrate the hallowed soil. In the centre of the square area rises the far-famed Kaaba, the funereal shade of which contrasts vividly with the sunlit walls and precipices of the town. It is a cubical structure of massive stone, the upper 2/3 of which are mantled by a black cloth embroidered with silver, and the lower portion hung with white linen. At a distance of several yards it is surrounded by a balustrade, provided with lamps, which are lighted in the evening, and the space thus enclosed is the circuit ground along which, day and night, crowds of pilgrims, performing the circular ceremony of tawaf, realize the idea of perpetual motion. We at once advanced to the black stone embedded in an angle of the Kaaba, kissed it, and exclaimed, Bismillah, Wallahu Akbar, in God's name, and God is greatest. Then we commenced the usual 7 rounds, 3 at a walking pace and 4 at a brisk trot. Next followed 2 prayer flexions at the tomb of Abraham, after which we drank of the water of Zamzam, said to be the same which quenched the thirst of Hagar's exhausted son. Besides the Kaaba, 8 minor structures adorn the quadrangle: the well of Zamzam, the library, the clock room, the triangular staircase, and 4 ornamental resting places for the orthodox sects of Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, and Hanbali. We terminated our morning duties by walking and running 7 times along the streets of Safa and Marwa, so named from the flight of 7 steps at each of its extremities. After a few days spent in visiting various places of interest, such as the slave market and forts, and the houses of the Prophet and the Caliphs Ali and Abu Bakr, we started on our 6 hours' journey to the mountain of Arafat, an hour's sojourn, at which, even in a state of insensibility, confers the rank of Haji. It is a mountain spur of about 150 feet in height, presenting an artificial appearance from the wall encircling it and the terrace on its slope, from which the Imam delivers a sermon before the departure of his congregation from Mecca. His auditors were, indeed, numerous, their tents being scattered over 2 or 3 miles of the country. A great number of their inmates were fellow subjects of ours from India. I surprised some of my Mecca friends by informing them that Queen Victoria numbers nearly 20 millions of Mohammedans among her subjects. On the 5th of June at sunset, commencing our return, we slept at the village of Muzdalifa, and there gathered and washed 7 pebbles of the size of peas, to be flung at 3 piles of whitewashed masonry known as the Shaitans, Satans of Munir. We acquitted ourselves satisfactorily of this duty on the festival of the 6th of June, the 10th day of the Arabian month Zul Hijjah. Each of us then sacrificed a sheep, had his hair and nails cut, exchanged the ihram for his best apparel, and embracing his friends, paid them the compliments of the season. The 2 following days, the Great, the Middle, and the Little Satan were again pelted, and bequeathing to the unfortunate inhabitants of Munna the unburied and odorous remains of nearly 100,000 animals, we returned 8,000 strong to Mecca. A week later, having helped to insult the tumulus of stones which marks, according to popular belief, the burial place of Abu Lahab, the unbeliever, who, we learn from the Qur'an, has descended into hell with his wife, gatherer of sticks, I was not sorry to relinquish a shade temperature of 120 degrees, and wend my way to Jeddah en route for England, after delegating to my brethren the recital of a prayer in my behalf at the tomb of the Prophet at Medina. In penning these lines, I am anxious to encourage other Englishmen, especially those from India, to perform the pilgrimage, without being deterred by exaggerated reports concerning the perils of the enterprise. It must, however, be understood that it is absolutely indispensable to be a Mussulman, at least externally, and to have an Arabic name. Neither the Qur'an nor the Sultan enjoins the killing of intrusive Jews or Christians. Nevertheless, 2 years ago, an incognito Jew who refused to repeat the creed was crucified by the Mecca populace. and in the event of a pilgrim again declaring himself to be an unbeliever, the authorities would be almost powerless to protect his life. An Englishman who is sufficiently conversant with the prayers, formulas, and customs of the Mussulmans, and possesses a sufficient guarantee of orthodoxy, need, however, apprehend no danger if he applies through the British consulate at Cairo for an introduction to the Amirul Hajj, the Prince of the Caravan. Finally, I am most anxious to recommend as Mutawwaf at Mecca Sheikh Muhammad Umar Fener Jizada. He is extremely courteous and obliging, and has promised me to show to other Englishmen the same politeness which I experienced from him myself. 1862 AD, 1278 AH. Al-Hajj Abdul Wahid. End of section 52. Appendix 8. Recording by Nicholas James Bridgewater. Recorded in Forgeside, Blaenavon, Wales. End of personal narrative of a pilgrimage to Al-Madinah and Meccah by Richard Francis Burton.